Hey there, history enthusiasts. Tonight we're stepping into 1348, perhaps the most terrifying year in human history. Forget the romanticized medieval tales you've seen in movies with noble knights and fair maidens. We're talking about a world where black boils erupted from your armpits, where entire families died in agony within days, and where the smell of death hung so thick in the air that survivors stuffed herbs in their nostrils just to breathe. This isn't just another plague story. We're about to walk through a single day in medieval Europe when the Black Death was turning bustling towns into ghost cities. You'll witness medical treatments that made patients beg for death, watch society collapse as death carts rolled through empty streets, and understand why this pandemic brought humanity closer to extinction than any war, famine, or natural disaster ever has. So, settle in, dim the lights, and prepare yourself for a journey through history's most unforgiving moments. Because after tonight, you'll understand that simply waking up tomorrow was once humanity's greatest achievement, and you'll never take your antibiotics, clean water, or pest-free home for granted again. Plague Year, 1348. The year is 1348, and you've just woken up in the most dangerous time in human history. Outside your window, the world is ending. Not with fire or flood, but with something far more insidious. A disease so devastating that it will claim 1/3 of Europe's population before it's done. Welcome to the Black Death, and congratulations, you probably won't survive the next 12 months. You blink awake to the sound of church bells, but something's wrong. They're not ringing the hours. They're tolling for the dead, again. The bells have been ringing almost constantly for weeks now, a grim soundtrack to humanity's darkest hour. Through your shuttered window, you catch a whiff of something that makes your stomach turn. It's not just the usual medieval cocktail of human waste-rotting food and unwashed bodies. There's something else now. Something sweet and putrid that seems to cling to everything. It's the smell of death. You live in a cramped wooden house in what was once a bustling market town. The streets that used to echo with merchants hawking their wares and children playing now echo with something else entirely, the groans of the dying, the wails of the bereaved, and an eerie silence that seems to swallow everything whole. Yesterday's neighbour might be today's corpse. Tomorrow's victim might be you. As you stumble from your straw mattress, you perform what has become the most important ritual of the day, checking yourself for signs. You run your hands along your neck, under your arms, around your groin. You're looking for them, the swellings that everyone whispers about in terror, the buboes. The buboes are egg-sized lumps that appear wherever lymph nodes cluster in the body. They start small like a pea under the skin, then swell to the size of an apple or even larger. They're excruciatingly painful to touch and often burst oozing blood and pus. Those lucky enough to survive the bubonic form might live. Those who develop the pneumonic form, where the disease attacks the lungs, rarely see another sunrise. You've heard the stories. Brother Marcus at the monastery developed a fever 3 days ago. By evening he was coughing up blood. By dawn he was dead. The baker's wife found buboes under her arms on Tuesday. She died Thursday, black spots covering her skin like a macabre constellation. Your own cousin started vomiting blood Sunday morning and was buried before the sunset. This morning, thank God, your body feels normal. But that could change by evening. If you do fall ill, you'd better hope you can't afford a doctor. Medieval physicians, armed with centuries-old theories and a complete misunderstanding of disease, are about as helpful as a leaky umbrella in a hurricane. Actually, they're worse. They're a leaky umbrella that actively tries to drown you. The leading medical theory of the day blames sickness on an imbalance of the 4 humours: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much blood, time for bloodletting. Too much phlegm, let's make you vomit. The fact that these treatments invariably make patients weaker and therefore more likely to die doesn't seem to concern anyone. Bloodletting is the treatment of choice for almost everything. Doctors will slice open your veins and drain precious blood into bowls, believing this will restore balance to your body. They might use leeches instead, covering your skin with writhing black parasites. Some physicians favour a more aggressive approach, making deep cuts in the buboes themselves, hoping to drain the evil vapours within. The only thing this accomplishes is guaranteeing a painful infected death. Other popular treatments include holding live chickens against the buboes. the theory being that the chickens will absorb the disease drinking ground. Unicorn horn mixed with wine. Spoiler, it's not unicorn horn and inhaling the vapours from heated herbs while wrapped in wool soaked in mercury. Some desperate souls try wearing amulets made from dried toad, believing amphibian magic will protect them. The most bizarre treatment involves deliberate exposure to bad smells, since many believe the plague spreads through bad air. Not entirely wrong, but not in the way they think some physicians recommend surrounding yourself with pleasant aromas to ward off the disease. Others take the opposite approach. If bad air causes plague, then perhaps worse air can drive it out. They prescribe rolling in sewage, inhaling the stench of rotting meat, or sleeping next to open latrines. None of this works, of course. In fact, most medical interventions make things worse. The bloodletting weakens patients who need every ounce of strength to fight the disease. The herb treatments do nothing. The chicken cure probably just spreads more germs. The only medicine that might actually help is prayer, and only because it doesn't actively harm the patient. As the death toll mounts, society begins to crumble like a house of cards in a windstorm. The plague doesn't discriminate. It kills kings and peasants, priests and sinners, young and old, with equal enthusiasm. But its effects ripple through society in ways no one anticipated. First, the economy collapses. Markets close because there aren't enough living merchants to run them. Fields go unharvested because entire families of farmers are dead. Workshops stand empty because master craftsmen have died without passing on their knowledge. Money becomes worthless when there's nothing left to buy. The legal system breaks down next. Courts can't convene when judges, lawyers and witnesses are all dead or dying. Crimes go unpunished, not because authorities don't care, but because there simply aren't enough authorities left. Property ownership becomes meaningless when everyone who might contest it is in the ground. Social hierarchies that have stood for centuries begin to wobble. When your lord dies of plague and his heir dies too, and the heir's heir is still a child who's really in charge. When the only people left in your village are the blacksmith, a handful of farmers and old Martha who keeps bees, the concept of noble blood starts to seem like a sick joke. Marriages arranged years in advance are cancelled when one or both parties die. Inheritance laws become nightmarish puzzles when entire bloodlines are wiped out. Churches struggle to perform basic services when most of their clergy are dead. Some parishes go months without a priest, meaning no masses, no confessions, no last rites. Perhaps most disturbing of all, basic human decency begins to erode. When you're not sure, you'll live to see tomorrow. Why worry about your neighbour's problems today, when food is scarce? Why share with strangers? When death lurks around every corner, why trust anyone who might be carrying the disease? Families abandon plague-stricken relatives, pushing them out into the streets to die alone. Parents flee, leaving diseased children behind. Children run away when their parents fall ill. The bonds that hold communities together, love, duty, responsibility, strain and snap under the weight of terror. In an age when God's presence is felt in every aspect of daily life, the plague brings a theological crisis as devastating as the physical one. How could a loving God allow such suffering? Why are the righteous dying alongside the wicked? Has humanity sinned so greatly that total destruction is the only answer? Different groups reach different conclusions, and all of them are terrifying. Many clergy proclaim that the plague is divine punishment for humanity's sins. They point to recent earthquakes, eclipses, and comets as warning signs that went unheeded. The solution, they insist, is repentance and prayer. Some priests organize massive public processions where hundreds of people march through the streets singing hymns and begging God's forgiveness. These gatherings, of course, are perfect for spreading the disease even faster. Others take a more extreme approach. A movement called the flagellants spreads across Europe like the plague itself. These religious fanatics believe that by inflicting pain on themselves, they can atone for humanity's sins and persuade God to end the pestilence. They march from town to town in organized groups, publicly whipping themselves until their backs run red with blood. The flagellant processions are terrifying spectacles. Men, women, and sometimes even children stripped to the waist and beat themselves with leather scourges embedded with metal spikes. They chant hymns as blood streams down their bodies. They believe their suffering will buy divine mercy. Towns open their gates to these bleeding pilgrims, hoping their sacrifice might protect the community. But the theological crisis goes deeper. As more priests die and fewer trained clergy remain to explain God's will, people begin drawing their own conclusions. Some decide that if God won't protect the church, maybe God doesn't exist at all. Others conclude that the end times have arrived and there's no point following earthly laws anymore. Wild theories spread like wildfire. Some claim the plague is caused by Jews poisoning wells, leading to horrific massacres across Europe. Others blame witches, lepers, or foreign merchants. A few insist it's punishment for the corruption of the church itself. When people are desperate for explanations, any answer, no matter how bizarre or brutal, can gain followers. Religious art becomes increasingly morbid. Churches commission paintings showing Christ and Mary surrounded by plague victims. New prayers focus obsessively on death and judgment. The popular Ars Moriendi, Art of Dying literature teaches people how to die properly in a state of grace, since living seems increasingly unlikely. Perhaps most troubling of all, some people embrace nihilism entirely. If God has abandoned the world to plague, why not abandon all moral restraints? Reports spread of devil worship, occult rituals and deliberate sacrilege. Whether these stories are true or just rumours born of fear, they reflect a society losing faith in everything it once held sacred. By late 1348, death has become so commonplace that it's almost boring. Almost. You've seen so many corpses that you can guess how someone died just by looking at them. The blue-black lips of someone who suffocated on their own blood. The grotesque swelling of bubonic victims. The horrible smell that clings to pneumonic plague corpses. The dead are everywhere. In the early days of the outbreak, people still tried to bury their loved ones properly. Families held wakes, priests administered last rites. Bodies were wrapped in shrouds and interred in consecrated ground with all the dignity the church demanded. But dignity is a luxury the living can no longer afford. Graveyards fill up first. When there's no more room in the church's small plots, new burial grounds are hastily consecrated. When those fill too, people start digging mass graves outside town walls. When even those overflow, they just start piling bodies wherever they can. The dead carts come every morning now. 2 men with cloth tied over their faces drive a wagon through the streets calling, "Bring out your dead." Families drag corpses to their doorsteps like garbage. The cartmen aren't gentle. They grab bodies by whatever they can reach and toss them into the wagon like sacks of grain. Arms and legs dangle over the sides. Sometimes a corpse groans or moves slightly. They get thrown in anyway. You've seen the great pits outside the city walls. Trenches as long as houses and twice as deep, filled with layer upon layer of human remains. The bodies are dumped in without ceremony, sometimes hundreds at a time. A thin layer of earth or lime is scattered over each layer, then more bodies are added. When a pit is full, it's covered over and marked with a simple wooden cross. No names, no individual graves, no dignity. The smell that rises from these mass graves is beyond description. It's sweet and putrid and somehow greasy, a smell that seems to coat the inside of your nose and throat. People living near the burial pits report that the stench wakes them at night. Some claim they can taste death in their food, as if the very air has become corrupted. Rats feast in the burial grounds. So do feral dogs and crows. Sometimes you see children playing around the edges of the plague pits, their games macabre, parodies of adult funeral rituals. Death has become so normal that even the young treat it as just another part of daily life. In larger cities, the situation is even worse. London's chroniclers report that normal burial practices completely collapsed by autumn 1348. Bodies were stacked in warehouse districts like cordwood. Ships full of corpses were towed out to sea and sunk. Some desperate souls simply threw dead relatives into rivers, contaminating the water supply for those downstream. The psychological impact is devastating. People stop grieving properly because there's no time. Someone else dies before you finish mourning the last loss. Children grow up thinking this level of death is normal. Adults develop a fatalistic acceptance that makes them careless with their own lives. You find yourself becoming callous in ways that would have horrified your former self. When you see a corpse in the street, you step around it without a second thought. When your neighbour starts coughing blood, you avoid them rather than offering help. When someone dies in your household, you feel more irritation than grief. Not because you don't care, but because you simply don't have the emotional capacity to process any more loss. By winter 1348, many people openly say that the dead are the lucky ones. Death, however painful, is quick, but living through the plague means enduring months of unrelenting horror with no end in sight. Food becomes scarce as farms are abandoned and trade routes collapse. What little food remains is often contaminated or spoiled. Markets sell mouldy bread and rancid meat because that's all there is. People eat things they never would have considered before. Acorns, grass bark, sometimes worse. Malnutrition makes everyone more vulnerable to disease. The water supply is contaminated in most places. Wells are polluted by runoff from mass graves. Rivers carry the waste of dead cities downstream. People know the water makes them sick, but there's nothing else to drink. Some try boiling water, but fuel for fires is scarce. Winters are particularly brutal. Firewood runs low because there aren't enough living people to cut and haul timber. Houses stand empty, their windows dark, their hearths cold. The lucky few who survive the winter often die of exposure the next year. Lawlessness spreads as social order collapses. Bandits raid abandoned homes and attack travellers. Pirates seize control of river trade. Some desperate people turn to cannibalism, though whether from hunger or madness is unclear. Town guards, depleted by death and desertion, can't maintain order. Justice becomes a matter of personal revenge. Madness, too, spreads like contagion. Some people develop what we might now recognize as severe depression or PTSD. They sit motionless for hours, staring at nothing, speaking to no one. Others become manic dancing and singing until they collapse. Still others retreat into fantasy, insisting that the world around them isn't real, that they're living in a nightmare they'll eventually wake from. Children perhaps most tragically adapt to the horror. They play games involving death and disease. They sing nursery rhymes about plague symptoms. They show no fear of corpses because they've never known a world where dead bodies weren't part of the landscape. An entire generation is growing up psychologically scarred in ways society doesn't understand. Yet somehow life continues. People still fall in love, though they might both be dead within weeks. Children are still born, though they face a world where survival is unlikely. Artists still create, though their work increasingly focuses on mortality and suffering. The human spirit, battered and broken though it may be, refuses to surrender entirely. And then gradually, inexplicably, the dying slows. By 1350, the worst of the plague has passed. Europe is fundamentally changed. Perhaps a third of its population is dead, entire bloodlines, erased social structures shattered. But life somehow begins again. Those who lived through the Black Death carried scars that never healed. They spoke of it in whispers for the rest of their lives. They flinched at the sound of church bells. They hoarded food and medicine. They named their children after plague saints and built monuments to the dead. But they also rebuilt. They remarried, had children, planted crops, opened shops. They created art and music that wrestled with profound questions about suffering, mortality, and meaning. They developed new medical practices, new religious movements, new social structures. The Black Death didn't just kill people, it killed an entire way of life. The medieval world of rigid hierarchies, unquestioned faith, and stable communities died with the plague victims. What emerged from the ashes was the beginning of the Renaissance, a reborn world that valued individual achievement, questioned authority, and embraced change. But that transformation came at an almost unimaginable cost. For those living through 1348, there was no promise of future renewal, no guarantee of survival, no comfort beyond the hope that tomorrow might bring a merciful end to the suffering. If you had lived in 1348, your entire world would have been death fear and the daily struggle to survive until sunset. You would have seen the collapse of everything familiar and the emergence of a society you wouldn't recognize. You would have watched loved ones die in agony while doctors tortured them with useless treatments. You would have walked past piles of corpses on your way to buy mouldy bread with worthless coins, and most likely you wouldn't have lived to see the other side. The Black Death was humanity's darkest hour, a time when civilization itself nearly collapsed under the weight of disease and despair. Those who survived rebuilt the world from its ruins, but they never forgot the year the world ended, the year when being alive was its own miracle, the year when tomorrow was never guaranteed. The bells have stopped ringing now. The mass graves are overgrown with wildflowers. The empty houses have either crumbled or been rebuilt, but the memory lingers in genealogies with mysterious gaps in family names that suddenly disappear from records in the haunted expressions captured in post-plague art. 1348 was the year that taught humanity its own fragility. It was the year that revealed how quickly civilization's veneer could strip away, leaving only fear death and the desperate struggle to survive another day. You wouldn't have survived it. Almost nobody did. Marie Curie and the glowing death. Modern people often imagine scientific discovery as a clean, safe process conducted in pristine laboratories by researchers in white coats. The reality, especially a century ago, was far more dangerous. Marie Curie, the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the only person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences, conducted her groundbreaking research in conditions that would horrify today's safety inspectors. And that research into the mysterious phenomenon of radioactivity was slowly killing her with every experiment. You might think you know Marie Curie's story. The Polish-born physicist who moved to Paris discovered radium with her husband Pierre and revolutionized our understanding of atomic structure. But you probably don't know just how dangerous her work was, how primitive her laboratory conditions were, or how her discoveries quite literally glowed in the dark while they destroyed her body from within. Picture this, it's 1898 and you're working in what Marie Curie grandly called a laboratory. In reality, it's a freezing cold shed that used to house corpses from the medical school next door. The roof leaks. The floor is dirt. There's no proper ventilation, no protective equipment, and no understanding that the materials you're working with emit invisible rays that are steadily destroying your cells. You're crushing tons of pitchblende, a heavy black uranium ore, in search of trace amounts of unknown radioactive elements. You don't wear gloves because they make the work clumsy. You don't wear a mask because nobody has told you the dust is dangerous. You stir boiling vats of dissolved ore with a bare iron rod, breathing in the fumes, wiping your hands on your clothes. The work is back-breaking. You and your husband Pierre spent hours grinding ore samples with a mortar and pestle. Your hands crack and bleed from the rough work. Your clothes are perpetually stained with mysterious substances. You're both losing weight and developing strange health problems, but you attribute this to exhaustion and the physical demands of your research. At night, you return to your laboratory to check on your experiments. In the darkness, the test tubes and crystallizing dishes glow with an eerie blue-green light. It's beautiful, magical even. You have no idea that this lovely luminescence is a sign of deadly radiation, that every time you admire the glowing samples, you're exposing yourself to enough radiation to damage your DNA. You carry test tubes of radium salts in your pockets. You leave radioactive samples on your desk, on your kitchen table, in your bedroom. Your notebooks, furniture, cookware, and clothes all become contaminated with radioactive dust. The very air you breathe sparkles with radioactive particles. What you're experiencing is acute radiation syndrome, though the term won't be coined for decades. Your fingertips are constantly burned and ulcerated. You feel tired all the time. You lose weight despite eating normally. Strange sores appear on your skin. You blame the hard work and the cold laboratory, not realizing that invisible radiation is systematically destroying your body's ability to produce healthy blood cells. Before Marie Curie, nobody understood radioactivity. The phenomenon had been discovered accidentally by Henri Becquerel in 1896, when he noticed that uranium salts could expose photographic plates even in complete darkness. But nobody knew what caused this strange property, or whether it might exist in other elements. Marie chose to investigate this mysterious radiation for her doctoral thesis. Using an innovative technique involving an electrometer invented by Pierre and his brother Jacques, she measured the electrical conductivity of air around various uranium compounds. Her methodical approach revealed that the intensity of radiation was proportional to the quantity of uranium present, suggesting that radioactivity was an atomic property, not a molecular one. This was revolutionary thinking. In 1898, atoms were still considered indivisible eternal building blocks of matter. The idea that atoms could spontaneously emit energy challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. Marie was proposing that atoms were not stable, unchanging entities, but dynamic systems capable of transformation. Working with Pierre-Marie began systematically testing other elements and compounds. They found that thorium also emitted radiation. More intriguingly, they discovered that some uranium ores were far more radioactive than pure uranium itself, suggesting the presence of undiscovered radioactive elements. This led to their most famous achievement, the discovery of two new elements, polonium, named after Marie's native Poland, and radium. But isolating these elements required processing enormous quantities of ore using primitive techniques that would be considered barbarically dangerous today. To extract pure radium, the Curies had to process literally tons of pitchblende ore. The Austrian government provided them with waste ore from their uranium mines in Joachimsthal, but even this gift came at considerable cost. The Curies had to pay for transportation and processing. The extraction process was exhausting and dangerous. First they ground the ore by hand using mortars and pestles. Then they dissolved it in acid, producing toxic fumes that filled their unventilated shed. They stirred boiling vats of dissolved ore with iron rods, precipitated various compounds, and repeated the process dozens of times to concentrate the radioactive elements. Marie often worked alone in the shed at night, stirring a vat containing 20 kilos of boiling ore with an iron rod nearly as tall as herself. The physical demands were crushing. She lost 10 kilos during those years, dropping to just 45 kilos of body weight. Pierre developed excruciating pain in his back and legs that made it difficult for him to walk or even dress himself. We now know these were symptoms of radiation exposure, but at the time they seemed like the inevitable cost of hard physical labor. The emotional toll was equally severe. The work was frustrating, with months of effort sometimes yielding only negative results. The Curies were constantly short of money, unable to hire assistants or improve their working conditions. Marie once wrote that she felt entirely absorbed by the preoccupation of isolating pure radium, working sometimes 15 hours a day in the laboratory. After 4 years of this punishing routine, Marie finally succeeded in isolating 1/10 of a gram of pure radium chloride from several tons of ore. This tiny sample was enough to determine radium's atomic weight and confirm its existence as a new element. But the personal cost was enormous. Both Curies were suffering from what we now recognize as chronic radiation exposure. Despite the health hazards, the Curies found their radioactive materials fascinating and beautiful. Radium salts glow with a distinctive blue-green light in the dark, creating an otherworldly luminescence that captivated anyone who saw it. Marie described returning to their laboratory at night to admire the glowing test tubes, writing that the sight filled her with new hope and fresh courage. This bioluminescence became almost an obsession. The Curies would invite friends and colleagues to visit their laboratory after dark to witness the magical glow. Guests were amazed by test tubes and crystallizing dishes that seemed to generate their own light, creating a fairy tale atmosphere in the rundown shed. Neither the Curies nor their visitors understood that this beautiful light was radiation interacting with air molecules and the materials themselves. Each photon they admired was evidence of atomic decay of materials, literally transforming themselves through radioactive breakdown. The brighter the glow, the more dangerous the sample. Marie kept a vial of radium salts on her nightstand so she could enjoy the glow before sleeping. She carried samples in her pockets to scientific meetings and demonstrations. Pierre would sometimes hold a piece of radium during lectures, allowing his hand to glow with eerie light while he spoke about radioactivity to audiences. The phosphorescent glow of radium became a sensation. Entrepreneurs began adding radium to watch faces, jewelry and paint to create products that glowed in the dark. Nobody understood the health implications. Radium was marketed as beneficial, even magical. Radium water was sold as a health tonic. Radium spa treatments promised to cure everything from arthritis to depression. The Curies unknowingly started a dangerous fad. Their beautiful, glowing discovery would soon be incorporated into consumer products, leading to radiation poisoning among workers in radium watch factories and customers who used radium-enhanced products. The same glow that fascinated the scientific community was slowly killing everyone exposed to it. In 1904, Pierre Curie's health was rapidly deteriorating. He suffered from severe pain in his back and legs, making it difficult for him to work or even walk. His hands were so damaged by radiation exposure that he had trouble holding objects. Modern medical analysis suggests he was suffering from severe anemia and possibly early stages of radiation-induced cancer. Despite his obvious illness, Pierre continued working with radioactive materials. He gave lectures while in obvious pain, sometimes needing to hold onto the podium for support. Marie later wrote that she feared for his mental state as well as his physical health. The constant pain and exhaustion were taking a psychological toll. On April 19, 1906, Pierre's story ended tragically, but not from radiation sickness. While crossing a busy Paris street in the rain, apparently lost in thought or weakened by his illness, he stepped directly into the path of a horse-drawn wagon. He was killed, instantly crushed under the wheels. Marie was devastated. She wrote in her diary, "Pierre is sleeping his last sleep beneath the earth. It is the end of everything, everything, everything." But rather than abandoning their radioactive research, she threw herself into it with even greater intensity. She took over Pierre's teaching position at the Sorbonne, becoming the first female professor in the university's 650-year history. Alone now, Marie continued working with radioactive materials for decades. She isolated pure radium metal in 1910, established the unit of radioactivity measurement, the Curie, and pioneered the use of radioactive isotopes in medicine. Her mobile X-ray units saved countless lives during World War I. But the radioactive materials that made her famous were slowly killing her. By the 1920s, she was showing clear signs of radiation syndrome: anemia, fatigue, kidney problems, and lesions on her hands. Her fingertips were permanently damaged, covered with thick, cracked skin and open sores that never properly healed. Marie Curie died on July 4, 1934, at age 66, from aplastic anemia, a condition where the bone marrow fails to produce enough blood cells. Modern medical experts agree this was almost certainly caused by prolonged radiation exposure. Her blood-forming organs had been destroyed by decades of handling radioactive materials without protection. Even in death, Marie Curie remained dangerous. Her body was so contaminated with radioactive materials that it had to be buried in a lead-lined coffin. Her laboratory notes, furniture, and personal effects were contaminated with radioactive dust that made them hazardous to handle. More remarkably, many of Marie Curie's possessions remain radioactive today, more than a century after her experiments. Her laboratory notebooks from the 1890s are stored in lead-lined boxes at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. Anyone who wants to view them must sign a waiver acknowledging the radiation risk and wear protective equipment. Her laboratory bench cooking pots and even her cookbook are still contaminated with radium and polonium. These items will remain radioactive for thousands of years. The half-life of radium-226 is 1,600 years, meaning it will take millennia for the radiation levels to drop to safe levels. In a sense, Marie Curie achieved a kind of immortality through radioactivity. The very materials that killed her continue to emit radiation long after her death, a ghostly reminder of her groundbreaking but dangerous work. The chair she sat in while grinding pitch blende still glows faintly in the dark, nearly a century later. Despite the tragic health consequences, Marie Curie's work laid the foundation for nuclear medicine and modern cancer treatment. Her discovery that radiation could destroy diseased tissue led to the development of radiotherapy. The radium she first isolated became a crucial tool for treating cancer, ironically fighting the same type of cellular damage that was killing her. During World War I, Marie recognized that X-rays could save soldiers' lives by helping doctors locate bullets and shrapnel. She developed mobile X-ray units called Petite Curie and drove them to the front lines herself. Despite the war raging around her, she was determined to put her scientific knowledge to practical use. Her work also contributed to our understanding of atomic structure. The discovery that atoms could spontaneously emit energy led to Einstein's theories about mass energy equivalence and eventually to nuclear physics. Without Marie Curie's painstaking isolation of radium, the nuclear age might have been delayed by decades. But perhaps most importantly, Marie Curie broke barriers for women in science. In an era when women were excluded from universities and scientific societies, she became one of the most celebrated scientists in the world. She proved that gender was irrelevant to scientific ability, though she paid an enormous personal price for that demonstration. The most terrifying aspect of Marie Curie's work was the invisibility of the danger. Radiation has no smell, no taste, no visible signs until damage is already done. She worked for decades with materials that were steadily destroying her body at the cellular level, and she had no way to detect or measure this invisible threat. Modern radiation workers wear dosimeters to measure exposure work behind lead shields and are regularly monitored for signs of radiation sickness. They understand the dangers and take extensive precautions. Marie Curie had none of these protections because nobody understood the risks. She handled radium with her bare hands, tasted it to check its purity, and stored it in unlabeled containers around her home and laboratory. She was unknowingly conducting a decades-long experiment in human radiation exposure with herself as the test subject. The radiation exposure wasn't just dangerous, it was cumulative. Each day's work added to her total dose, building up damage that her body couldn't repair. Unlike a workplace injury that heals over time, radiation damage accumulates until it overwhelms the body's ability to function. Marie Curie's sacrifice advanced human knowledge immeasurably. But it also serves as a reminder that scientific progress often comes at a terrible cost, particularly for the pioneers who venture into unknown territory without maps or safety equipment. Her glowing laboratory was beautiful and magical, but it was also a death trap. She achieved scientific immortality while ensuring her own mortality through the invisible killer she spent her life studying. In the end, the radium that made her famous also killed her one radioactive decay at a time. The mysterious builders of Easter Island. On Easter Sunday, 1722, Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen spotted land where his maps showed only empty ocean. The island was impossibly remote, nearly 2,000 miles from the nearest populated landmass, sitting alone in the vast Pacific like a forgotten thought. But this wasn't just any uninhabited rock. Scattered across the island's grassy hills stood hundreds of massive stone heads staring silently inland with an intensity that made the Dutch sailors uneasy. What Roggeveen had found was Rapa Nui, now called Easter Island, home to one of history's most puzzling civilizations. The stone statues, called moai by the island's Polynesian inhabitants, represented an achievement that seemed impossible for such a small, isolated population. How had these people carved nearly 1,000 stone giants, some weighing as much as 80 tons? How had they moved them across the island without wheels, machines, or large animals? And perhaps most mysteriously, why had they built them at all? The story of Easter Island's statue builders is one of human ingenuity. Pushed to extremes of a civilization that transformed a remote, volcanic island into something extraordinary, and ultimately of how success can carry the seeds of its own destruction. Long before Europeans dreamed of crossing oceans, Polynesian navigators were already masters of the Pacific. Using outrigger canoes and double-hulled voyaging vessels, they navigated by stars, waves, and wind patterns across thousands of miles of open ocean. These weren't desperate refugees blown off course, they were skilled explorers deliberately seeking new lands. Around 1200 AD, a group of these Polynesian voyagers reached the most remote, habitable island on Earth. They brought with them everything needed to establish a new civilization: breadfruit taro, sweet potatoes, chickens, and most importantly, their knowledge of how to thrive in an island environment. The island they found was unlike anywhere they'd settled before. Rapa Nui was small, only 64 square miles, but it was blessed with fertile volcanic soil and a year-round temperate climate. Most importantly, it was covered with palm trees, some growing over 80 feet tall with trunks 6 feet in diameter. These massive palms would provide everything the settlers needed: wood for houses, boats and tools, palm wine for sustenance, and rope from the fibrous bark. For the first few centuries, life on Easter Island was probably pleasant. The population grew slowly but steadily. They developed a unique culture that blended their Polynesian heritage with adaptations to their new environment. They created a writing system called Rongorongo, one of the few independently developed writing systems in human history. They built stone houses, cultivated extensive gardens, and raised chickens. Most remarkably, they began carving statues. The moai didn't appear overnight. Archaeological evidence suggests the statue carving tradition began around 1300 AD and continued for over 400 years. The earliest statues were relatively small and simple, but over time they grew larger, more elaborate, and more numerous. By the peak of the statue building period, Easter Island's population had organized itself around a single consuming purpose, creating increasingly massive stone monuments. But why statues? The answer lies in Polynesian spiritual beliefs about ancestors and mana, spiritual power that could be channeled through sacred objects. The moai weren't just sculptures, they were vessels for ancestral spirits, protective guardians watching over the island's communities. Each statue represented a deified ancestor, and their placement around the island created a spiritual landscape where the living and dead coexisted. The statues were carved at Rano Raraku, a volcanic quarry that became the island's primary workshop. This site, with its easily carved volcanic tuff, was perfectly suited for massive stone sculptures. Teams of master carvers using only stone hand tools could chip away at the quarry face to create statues in various stages of completion. The carving process was incredibly labour-intensive. Each moai required an estimated 5 to 6 person-years of work, meaning a team of 20 skilled carvers might spend 3 to 4 months on a single statue. They worked with basalt handpicks, obsidian blades, and water to soften the stone. The precision required was extraordinary. Many moai have detailed features including elongated ears, prominent noses, and thin lips that somehow convey distinct personalities despite their stylized appearance. What makes the Easter Island statues truly remarkable isn't just their size or artistry, but their sheer number. Nearly 1,000 moai have been catalogued across the island, representing an enormous investment of human effort. For a population that probably never exceeded 15,000 people, this meant that statue carving was one of the most important activities in their society. Perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding the moai was how they were transported from the quarry to their final locations around the island. Most statues ended up on ceremonial platforms called ahu, some located more than 10 miles from Rano Raraku. Moving an 80-ton stone statue across rough terrain without wheels, machines, or large animals should have been impossible. For centuries, scholars proposed various theories. Maybe the islanders rolled the statues on logs. Perhaps they dragged them on wooden sleds. Some suggested they moved them upright using ropes and a rocking motion. But none of these theories fully explained how such massive objects had been transported without leaving clear archaeological evidence of the method used. The breakthrough came when researchers listened to the island's oral traditions. According to Rapa Nui legends, the statues walked to their destinations. For years, archaeologists dismissed this as mythological thinking. Then in 2012, researchers Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo decided to test whether the statues could literally walk. Using a 5-ton replica moai and 3 teams pulling ropes, they demonstrated that the statues could indeed be moved upright in a walking motion. By rocking the statue forward and using coordinated rope pulling, they could make it walk in a way that closely matched the oral traditions. This method would have required far fewer people than previously thought, and would have protected the statues from damage during transport. The walking theory also explains why so many moai are found along ancient roads, some apparently abandoned in transit. These aren't failed transport attempts. They're statues that were walking to their destinations when the statue-moving tradition suddenly stopped. During the height of the statue-building period, roughly 1400–1600 AD Easter Island supported a complex society, unlike anything seen elsewhere in Polynesia. The island was divided into territories controlled by different clans, each with their own ceremonial centres marked by ahu platforms and their guardian moai. Daily life revolved around supporting the statue-building effort. Specialised groups included the carvers at Rano Raraku, the rope makers who created the miles of cordage needed to move statues, the food producers who fed the workforce and the engineers who designed the transport systems, and ceremonial platforms. The statue builders developed sophisticated techniques for quarrying, carving, and moving massive stones. They created an island-wide road system connecting the quarry to various ahu sites. They engineered complex ceremonial platforms that could support multi-ton statues while incorporating astronomical alignments and water management systems. Population estimates suggest the island reached its peak around 1600 AD, with perhaps 15,000 residents. This was a remarkable population density for a Polynesian island sustained by intensive agriculture, using sophisticated techniques like crop rotation, windbreaks, and stone gardens that created microclimates for sensitive plants. The society was likely hierarchical but cooperative. Building and moving moai required coordination between different clans and specialists. The oral traditions speak of friendly competition between groups. Which clan could carve the largest statue move at the farthest, or create the most impressive Ahu platform. But this golden age was built on a foundation that couldn't last forever. The moai required enormous amounts of rope made from the fibrous bark of the giant palm trees. Moving a single statue might require miles of rope, and the island had hundreds of statues to transport. Additionally, the growing population needed wood for houses, boats, tools, and fuel. Gradually, the island's forest began to disappear. The Easter Island palm was particularly vulnerable because it reproduced slowly. These massive trees took decades to mature and produce seeds. As humans and the rats they'd introduced ate the palm nuts, and as adults trees were harvested faster than they could regenerate, the forest entered a death spiral. Pollen analysis from the island's crater lakes tells the story in painful detail. Around 1400 AD, palm pollen begins declining in the sediment layers. By 1600 AD, it disappears entirely. Somewhere around that time, someone cut down the very last palm tree on Easter Island. The ecological consequences were catastrophic. Without trees to prevent erosion, the island's fertile soil began washing into the sea. Without wood for canoes, the islanders could no longer fish in deep waters or maintain contact with other Polynesian islands. Without palm tree products, their technology regressed and their ability to build or move moai effectively ended. The last moai were left scattered along the transport roads, never reaching their intended destinations. The age of statue building was over. What followed was one of the most dramatic societal collapses in human history. The peaceful cooperative society that had built nearly 1,000 stone statues descended into warfare, environmental destruction, and possibly even cannibalism. Without ocean fishing, the islanders became entirely dependent on land-based food sources. But the ecological damage made even basic agriculture difficult. Competition for limited resources led to conflict between the clans. Archaeological evidence shows that many IHU platforms were deliberately destroyed during this period, with their moai toppled and sometimes used as building stones for defensive walls. The obsidian spear points found at archaeological sites from this period tell a grim story of increasing violence. Bodies show signs of traumatic injury. The oral traditions speak of the Ororoko Wars, a period of clan warfare and social breakdown. Population crashed from perhaps 15,000 at its peak to fewer than 3,000 by the time Europeans arrived. The survivors had developed a new social structure based on the Birdman cult, a religious system focused on an annual competition to collect eggs from offshore islets. This replaced the ancestor worship associated with the moai. When Jacob Roggeveen arrived in 1722, he found an island that puzzled him deeply. The massive statues suggested a sophisticated civilization, but the people he met seemed to be living in poverty and couldn't explain how the monuments had been built. The Europeans couldn't understand how such a small population could have created such massive works. For centuries after European contact, Easter Island remained one of archaeology's greatest puzzles. The statues were so impressive, and the surviving population so reduced that many people couldn't believe the Polynesian islanders had built them. Wild theories proliferated. The statues were built by lost civilizations, ancient astronauts, or African explorers. It wasn't until the 20th century that careful archaeological investigation began revealing the true story of the statue builders. Researchers like Thor Heyerdahl, William Malloy, and more recently Jo Ann van Tilburg and Terry Hunt pieced together the evidence from archaeology, linguistic analysis, and oral traditions. Modern techniques revealed that the moai are far more complex than early observers realized. Many statues have bodies buried beneath centuries of soil accumulation. They're not just heads, but full figures. Some have intricate carvings on their backs representing tattoos or clothing. Red scoria hats called pukao were quarried from a separate site and placed on many statues. Excavations at Rano Raraku revealed that the quarry site was an active workshop where hundreds of statues in various stages of completion were carved, finished, and prepared for transport. Chemical analysis showed that different statues were made from stone, quarried from specific locations, allowing researchers to trace the movement of statues across the island. Perhaps most importantly, collaboration with the island's Polynesian descendants helped archaeologists understand that the moai were never mysterious. The Rapa Nui people maintained oral traditions explaining exactly who built the statues, why they built them, and how they were moved. The mystery existed mainly because earlier researchers hadn't listened to these traditions or had dismissed them as mythology. Today, the Moai continue to fascinate visitors and researchers. The statues that once watched over a thriving civilization now stare across an island, struggling with the challenges of isolation, environmental damage, and cultural preservation. Many of the original 1,000 Moai still stand, though earthquakes and human conflict have toppled others. Some Ahu platforms have been carefully restored using archaeological evidence and traditional building techniques. The quarry at Rano Raraku, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, preserves dozens of statues in various stages of completion. Modern Easter Island, officially part of Chile since 1888, faces many of the same challenges that confronted the original statue builders. The island's isolated location makes everything expensive to import. The environment is still fragile, damaged by centuries of overuse and invasive species. The small population must balance preservation of their unique culture with the practical demands of modern life. The Rapa Nui people, descendants of the statue builders, continue to maintain traditions connected to the Moai. They carve small replica statues using traditional techniques, perform ceremonial dances that tell the stories of their ancestors, and work to preserve their language and customs, despite centuries of outside pressure. But perhaps the most important lesson of Easter Island isn't about the past, it's about the future. The statue builders created something magnificent, but their success led them to overexploit their environment in ways that ultimately proved unsustainable. They transformed their island so completely that it could no longer support the civilization that had flourished there. The Moai of Easter Island represent both human achievement and human folly. They show us what people can accomplish when they work together toward a common goal, organizing their entire society around a shared vision. The precision of the carving, the engineering required to move them, and the sheer scale of the project demonstrate the remarkable capabilities of human beings working collectively. But the statues also represent the dangers of success without sustainability. The statue builders were so focused on their magnificent project that they didn't notice or couldn't stop the environmental destruction that was undermining their society's foundations. They kept building bigger statues even as their island's capacity to support statue building diminished. In many ways, Easter Island serves as a cautionary tale for our own global civilization. Like the statue builders, we have achieved remarkable things through cooperation and innovation. But like them, we face the challenge of balancing our achievements with the environmental limits of our world. The Moai still stand silent witnesses to both human creativity and human short-sightedness. They remind us that civilizations can create wonders that outlast the societies that built them, but they also remind us that no society is immune to the consequences of environmental destruction. Standing among the statues today, visitors often feel a profound sense of mystery and loss. These monuments represent an entire world that vanished, a unique culture, language, and way of life that flourished for centuries in one of the most isolated places on Earth. The statue builders achieved a kind of immortality through their stone creations, but the civilization that gave them meaning disappeared forever. The walking statues of Easter Island walked through history carrying the hopes and beliefs of their creators. Today, they stand as monuments not just to Polynesian achievement, but to the eternal human tension between ambition and wisdom, creation and preservation, the desire to build something lasting, and the need to sustain the world that makes building possible. The lost Sogdian trading empire. In the vast expanse of Central Asia, where the scorching deserts meet towering mountain ranges and ancient caravan routes weave through oasis cities like threads in a cosmic tapestry, there once flourished one of history's most remarkable yet forgotten civilizations. The Sogdian trading empire, centered in the fertile valleys of what is now Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, dominated the commercial highways of Eurasia for over a millennium, from approximately the 4th century BCE to the 11th century CE. These masterful merchants, diplomats, and cultural intermediaries created a vast network of trade and influence that stretched from the Mediterranean shores to the courts of Tang Dynasty China, establishing themselves as the undisputed masters of the Silk Road and the architects of the world's first truly global economy. The geographic foundation of Sogdian success lay in their homeland's extraordinary position at the convergence of natural trade corridors that had been used by nomadic peoples and early merchants for thousands of years before their rise to prominence. The Sogdian territories encompassed not only the fertile river valleys, but also crucial mountain passes through the Pamir, Hindu Kush, and Tian Shan ranges that served as gateways between the great civilizations of antiquity. This strategic location enabled them to control the flow of goods, ideas, and people between the sedentary agricultural societies of China, Persia, India, and the Mediterranean world, while also maintaining crucial relationships with the nomadic confederations that dominated the steppes of Inner Asia. The Sogdians emerged from the ancient region of Sogdiana, nestled between the Amu Darya and Sir Darya rivers in the heart of Central Asia, a land blessed with fertile soils, abundant water, and a strategic position at the crossroads of continents. Their homeland was a patchwork of prosperous city-states including Samarkand, Bukhara, Panjakent, and dozens of smaller settlements, each serving as vital nodes in the vast commercial network that would eventually span 3 continents. The geography of Sogdiana provided natural advantages for trade and agriculture, with its river valleys offering reliable water sources for irrigation and its position between the great civilizations of Persia, India, China, and the Mediterranean, creating endless opportunities for profitable exchange. The climatic conditions of Sogdiana played a crucial role in shaping the character and capabilities of its inhabitants, as the region's continental climate, with its extreme seasonal variations, demanded exceptional adaptability and resourcefulness from those who sought to prosper there. The harsh winters required sophisticated food preservation and storage techniques, while the hot, dry summers necessitated advanced irrigation systems and water management strategies that became hallmarks of Sogdian engineering expertise. These environmental challenges fostered a culture of innovation and practical problem-solving that would serve the Sogdians well in their later commercial endeavors across diverse climatic zones and geographical regions. The origins of Sogdian civilization can be traced back to the ancient Iranian peoples who settled in Central Asia during the first millennium BCE, bringing with them advanced agricultural techniques, sophisticated urban planning, and a merchant culture that would become legendary throughout the ancient world. These early Sogdians developed a unique synthesis of Iranian, Greek, Buddhist, and local Central Asian cultural elements, creating a cosmopolitan civilization that was remarkably adaptable and open to foreign influences, while maintaining its distinct identity and commercial focus. Their society was built around the principle of trade as the foundation of prosperity and cultural exchange, with merchant families forming the backbone of political and social organization. The social structure of early Sogdian society reflected their commercial orientation, with merchant families occupying positions of prominence and influence that in other civilizations might have been reserved for military aristocracies or priestly classes. This commercial elite developed sophisticated educational systems that emphasized practical skills such as languages, mathematics, geography, and diplomatic protocol, while also maintaining cultural traditions that reinforced group solidarity and identity. The integration of religious and commercial life created a unique social dynamic where spiritual beliefs and business practices reinforced each other, contributing to the remarkable cohesion and persistence of Sogdian cultural identity across centuries of political change. The rise of the Sogdian trading empire coincided with the expansion of transcontinental trade routes that historians would later call the Silk Roads, though the Sogdians themselves were instrumental in creating and maintaining these commercial arteries that connected east and west. Beginning in the 2nd century BCE, as Chinese demand for Central Asian horses grew and Mediterranean appetite for silk increased, enterprising Sogdian merchants positioned themselves as essential intermediaries in this lucrative exchange. They established trading posts, caravanserais, and commercial colonies from the Black Sea to the Yellow River, creating a network of business relationships and cultural connections that facilitated not only the exchange of goods, but also the transmission of ideas, technologies, and artistic styles across the ancient world. The development of these trade networks required unprecedented levels of organization and coordination, as Sogdian merchants had to navigate not only the physical challenges of long-distance travel through harsh terrain, but also the complex political landscape of ancient Eurasia, with its constantly shifting alliances and territorial boundaries. The establishment of permanent commercial infrastructure, including warehouses, banking facilities, and diplomatic missions in major cities across Eurasia, represented a massive investment of capital and human resources that demonstrated the sophisticated planning capabilities and long-term strategic thinking that characterized Sogdian commercial culture. The commercial genius of the Sogdians lay not merely in their geographical position, but in their sophisticated understanding of international trade, finance and diplomacy that enabled them to thrive in the complex political landscape of ancient Eurasia. They developed innovative commercial practices, including letters of credit, partnership agreements, and insurance systems that reduced the risks of long-distance trade while maximizing profits. Sogdian merchants were multilingual cosmopolitans who could navigate the courts of Byzantine emperors and Chinese emperors with equal skill, adapting their religious practices, cultural customs, and business methods to local conditions while maintaining their Sogdian identity and commercial networks. The financial innovations developed by Sogdian merchants represented some of the earliest examples of sophisticated international banking and credit systems that would later influence commercial practices throughout Eurasia and beyond. Their development of standardized weights, measures, and currency exchange systems facilitated trade across vast distances and cultural boundaries, while their creation of commercial law and dispute resolution mechanisms provided the legal framework necessary for large-scale international commerce. These innovations required not only technical expertise, but also the establishment of trust networks and reputation systems that could function across diverse political and cultural environments. The linguistic achievements of the Sogdians represent one of their most significant contributions to world civilization, as their language became the lingua franca of Silk Road trade and diplomacy for several centuries. Sogdian was an Eastern Iranian language that developed its own script and literary tradition, becoming so widely used in Central Asian commerce that merchants from diverse ethnic backgrounds learned it as a necessity for conducting business. The Sogdian script was adapted from Aramaic letters and evolved into several regional variants, eventually giving rise to the Uyghur and Mongolian scripts that would shape the literary traditions of Central and East Asia for centuries to come. The widespread adoption of Sogdian as a commercial language reflected not only the practical dominance of Sogdian merchants in international trade, but also the cultural prestige and intellectual sophistication associated with Sogdian civilization. Sogdian became the language of diplomatic correspondence, legal documents, and commercial contracts across a vast area of Eurasia, while also serving as a vehicle for the transmission of religious and philosophical texts between different cultural traditions. The preservation of thousands of Sogdian documents in archaeological sites from the Tarim Basin to the shores of the Caspian Sea provides contemporary scholars with unprecedented insights into the daily operations of ancient international commerce and the cultural life of cosmopolitan trading communities. The religious landscape of Sogdian civilization reflects the remarkable tolerance and adaptability that characterized their approach to cultural diversity and commercial opportunity. While originally followers of Zoroastrianism, the Sogdians readily embraced Buddhism, Manichaeism, Nestorian Christianity, and later Islam, often maintaining multiple religious practices simultaneously and adapting their beliefs to local conditions and commercial necessities. This religious flexibility was not mere opportunism, but reflected a sophisticated understanding of how cultural adaptation could facilitate business relationships and political alliances while preserving essential elements of Sogdian identity and community solidarity. The religious pluralism of Sogdian society extended beyond mere tolerance to active patronage and promotion of diverse spiritual traditions, with Sogdian merchants often serving as important patrons of religious institutions and scholarly activities across Eurasia. Their support for the construction of Buddhist monasteries, Manichaean temples, Christian churches, and Zoroastrian fire altars reflected not only personal piety but also strategic investment in institutions that could provide crucial services to traveling merchants, including lodging, banking, and information exchange. This integration of religious and commercial activities created powerful networks of mutual obligation and support that enhanced the effectiveness and reach of Sogdian trading operations. Sogdian cities were marvels of urban planning and architectural achievement that combined practical commercial needs with aesthetic beauty and cultural sophistication. Samarkand, the most famous of Sogdian cities, was renowned throughout the ancient world for its magnificent palaces, bustling bazaars, and cosmopolitan population that included merchants, artisans, and diplomats from across Eurasia. The city's architectural style blended Persian, Greek, Indian, and Chinese influences into a distinctive Sogdian aesthetic that emphasized both grandeur and functionality, with elaborate irrigation systems, defensive walls, and public buildings that served the needs of a major commercial center while expressing the wealth and cultural sophistication of its inhabitants. The urban infrastructure of Sogdian cities represented sophisticated solutions to the challenges of supporting large, diverse populations in arid environments, while maintaining the security and commercial efficiency necessary for international trade. Advanced water management systems, including underground channels, reservoir networks, and fountain complexes, provided reliable water supplies for both domestic and commercial use, while elaborate marketplace designs facilitated the efficient exchange of goods from across the known world. The integration of residential, commercial, and industrial districts within comprehensive defensive systems demonstrated urban planning capabilities that rivaled those of contemporary Roman, Chinese, and Persian cities. The archaeological evidence from Sogdian cities reveals a level of artistic and technological achievement that rivals any ancient civilization, with sophisticated metalwork, textile production, ceramic arts, and architectural decoration that demonstrates both technical mastery and aesthetic refinement. Sogdian artisans were particularly renowned for their work in precious metals, creating elaborate silver vessels, jewelry, and decorative objects that were prized throughout Eurasia and often served as diplomatic gifts or trade goods that spread Sogdian artistic influence far beyond their homeland. Their textile production included some of the finest silk weaving in the ancient world, with Sogdian silk fabrics being particularly valued in Byzantine and European markets for their quality and distinctive patterns. The artistic production of Sogdian workshops reflected the cosmopolitan character of their civilization, incorporating motifs, techniques, and materials from across the known world, while developing distinctive styles that became recognized markers of Sogdian craftsmanship. The fusion of Hellenistic sculptural traditions with Persian decorative motifs, Chinese painting techniques, and Indian symbolic systems created unique artistic forms that expressed the multicultural nature of Sogdian society while maintaining coherent aesthetic principles. The high quality and wide distribution of Sogdian artistic products contributed significantly to their commercial success and cultural influence throughout ancient Eurasia. The political organization of the Sogdian trading empire was characterized by a decentralized system of city-states and merchant republics that maintained their independence while cooperating in matters of common commercial and security interest. Unlike the centralized empires of their neighbors, Sogdian political structure was based on merchant oligarchies and commercial partnerships that could adapt quickly to changing political and economic conditions while maintaining the flexibility necessary for successful long-distance trade. This political system enabled the Sogdians to survive the rise and fall of numerous empires while maintaining their commercial networks and cultural identity across centuries of political upheaval. The governance structures of Sogdian cities typically involved councils of prominent merchant families who made collective decisions about trade policies, diplomatic relations, and internal administration while respecting the autonomy of individual commercial enterprises and maintaining the flexibility necessary for rapid response to changing market conditions. This system of collective leadership balanced the need for coordination and cooperation with the entrepreneurial independence that was essential to commercial success, creating a political culture that emphasized consensus building, pragmatic problem-solving, and long-term strategic thinking, rather than personal ambition or ideological conflict. The diplomatic skills of Sogdian merchants and political leaders were legendary throughout the ancient world, as they successfully navigated the complex political landscape of Eurasia by maintaining friendly relations with multiple competing powers simultaneously. Sogdian diplomats served as advisors to Chinese emperors, Persian shahs, Turkish khans, and Byzantine emperors, often playing crucial roles in international negotiations and treaty-making while advancing Sogdian commercial interests. Their diplomatic success was based on their reputation for reliability, their extensive knowledge of international affairs, and their ability to serve as neutral intermediaries in conflicts between major powers. The diplomatic networks established by Sogdian merchants extended far beyond formal political relationships to encompass cultural, religious, and personal connections that provided multiple channels for communication and influence across the ancient world. Their practice of maintaining representative offices in major cities throughout Eurasia created a sophisticated intelligence network that enabled rapid transmission of political and commercial information while providing platforms for diplomatic intervention when conflicts threatened trade routes or commercial interests. The integration of commercial and diplomatic activities created powerful leverage that allowed relatively small Sogdian communities to exercise influence far beyond what their military capabilities alone would have permitted. The Sogdian contribution to the development of international law and commercial practices was profound and lasting, as they created many of the legal and financial institutions that made long-distance trade possible in the ancient world. Sogdian commercial law influenced legal systems from China to the Mediterranean, establishing precedents for contract enforcement, dispute resolution, and commercial partnerships that provided the foundation for international trade relationships. Their innovations in banking and finance, including early forms of credit systems and commercial insurance, enabled merchants to undertake ambitious trading ventures with reduced risk while providing the financial infrastructure necessary for large-scale commercial operations. The legal innovations developed by Sogdian merchants addressed fundamental challenges of conducting business across diverse legal and cultural systems, creating standardized procedures and documentation that could be recognized and enforced in different jurisdictions while respecting local customs and authorities. Their development of commercial arbitration systems provided efficient alternatives to lengthy and expensive litigation while maintaining the flexibility necessary for preserving business relationships and commercial reputations. These legal innovations reflected sophisticated understanding of the relationship between law, commerce, and cultural diversity that remains relevant for contemporary international business. The cultural impact of Sogdian civilization extended far beyond commerce to encompass significant contributions to art, literature, music, and intellectual life throughout Eurasia. Sogdian musicians, artists, and entertainers were highly valued in courts from Constantinople to Chang'an, bringing with them musical instruments, artistic techniques, and performance traditions that enriched the cultural life of their host societies. The famous Tang dynasty poetry that celebrates Central Asian themes and imagery often reflects Sogdian cultural influences, while Byzantine and Islamic art shows clear signs of Sogdian artistic motifs and techniques that entered through commercial and diplomatic contacts. The cultural transmission facilitated by Sogdian networks involved not only the exchange of artistic styles and techniques, but also the spread of intellectual traditions, scientific knowledge, and philosophical ideas that contributed to the development of scholarship and learning across ancient Eurasia. Sogdian scholars and intellectuals served as translators, interpreters, and cultural bridges between different civilizations, facilitating the exchange of knowledge in fields ranging from astronomy and mathematics to medicine and philosophy. Their role in preserving and transmitting classical texts during periods of political upheaval and cultural transition makes them crucial figures in the intellectual history of the ancient world. The role of Sogdian women in commercial and cultural life was remarkably progressive for the ancient world, with women often participating actively in trade, serving as cultural intermediaries, and maintaining important social and religious functions within Sogdian communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that Sogdian women enjoyed considerable economic independence and social status, with some becoming wealthy merchants in their own right, and others serving as important cultural bridges between different ethnic and religious communities. This relatively egalitarian approach to gender roles may have contributed to Sogdian commercial success by maximizing human resources and facilitating cultural adaptation in diverse social environments. The participation of women in Sogdian commercial activities extended beyond support roles to include independent business ownership, partnership arrangements, and involvement in long-distance trading ventures that required sophisticated financial and logistical planning. Women merchants often specialized in particular categories of goods such as textiles, jewelry, or luxury items that required detailed knowledge of fashion trends and consumer preferences in distant markets. Their involvement in religious and cultural activities provided crucial connections between commercial and spiritual communities, while facilitating the cultural adaptation that was essential to Sogdian success in diverse social environments. The technological innovations developed or transmitted by Sogdian merchants had far-reaching impacts on world civilization, as they served as conduits for the exchange of technical knowledge between different regions and cultures. Sogdians played crucial roles in transmitting paper-making technology from China to the Islamic world, and eventually to Europe, while also facilitating the spread of printing techniques, astronomical instruments, and agricultural innovations that revolutionized production and communication across Eurasia. Their merchant network served as information highways that enabled rapid transmission of technological innovations and scientific knowledge between distant civilizations. The technological transfer facilitated by Sogdian networks involved not only the transmission of existing knowledge, but also the adaptation and improvement of technologies to meet local conditions and requirements. Sogdian merchants and artisans often served as intermediaries in the process of technological innovation, combining knowledge from different sources to create improved products and processes that could be marketed across their extensive commercial networks. Their role in facilitating technological exchange contributed significantly to the acceleration of economic and social development across ancient Eurasia, while establishing precedents for international cooperation in scientific and technical fields. The Sogdian impact on the development of global cuisine and agricultural practices was profound but often overlooked, as their trading networks introduced new crops, spices, and culinary techniques to regions far from their origins. Sogdian merchants were instrumental in spreading rice cultivation techniques, introducing new varieties of fruits and vegetables across Eurasia, and creating the spice trade networks that would later be dominated by Arab and European merchants. Their contribution to viticulture and winemaking was particularly significant, as they developed grape varieties and wine production techniques that spread throughout Central Asia and beyond. The agricultural innovations promoted by Sogdian merchants included not only new crops and cultivation techniques, but also improved methods of food preservation, storage, and transportation that enabled the development of specialized agricultural production for distant markets. Their expertise in organizing large-scale agricultural enterprises and coordinating complex supply chains provided models for agricultural development that influenced farming practices across ancient Eurasia. The introduction of new crops and agricultural techniques often had profound social and economic impacts on recipient regions, contributing to population growth, urbanization, and economic diversification. The educational and intellectual traditions of Sogdian civilization emphasized practical knowledge, linguistic skills, and cultural adaptability that prepared young Sogdians for success in the competitive world of international trade. Sogdian schools taught multiple languages, commercial mathematics, geography, and diplomatic skills, while also providing training in religious and cultural practices that would enable graduates to function effectively in diverse social environments. This educational system produced generations of highly skilled merchants, diplomats, and cultural intermediaries who maintained Sogdian influence and prosperity across centuries of political and economic change. The educational practices of Sogdian society reflected their understanding that success in international commerce required not only technical skills, but also deep cultural knowledge and interpersonal abilities that could not be acquired through purely academic study. Young Sogdians typically received extensive practical training through apprenticeships with experienced merchants, diplomatic missions, and cultural exchange programs that provided direct exposure to the diverse environments in which they would later work. This combination of formal education and practical experience created a highly educated and culturally sophisticated commercial class that was uniquely equipped to navigate the complexities of ancient international trade. The decline of Sogdian power began in the 8th century CE with the Arab conquest of Central Asia and the rise of Islam as the dominant religious and political force in the region. While many Sogdians converted to Islam and continued their commercial activities under new political arrangements, the traditional Sogdian political system of independent city-states was gradually absorbed into larger Islamic empires that centralized political authority and reduced the autonomy that had been essential to Sogdian commercial success. The shift from Persian and Sogdian cultural dominance to Arabic and Islamic hegemony fundamentally altered the cultural landscape of Central Asia, while diminishing the distinctive Sogdian identity that had sustained their trading networks. The process of Islamic conquest and cultural transformation in Central Asia was gradual and complex, involving not only military conquest but also religious conversion, linguistic change, and the integration of existing elites into new political structures. Many Sogdian merchants and administrators found opportunities for advancement within Islamic imperial systems, while maintaining some elements of their traditional commercial practices and cultural identity. However, the centralization of political authority and the standardization of legal and administrative systems under Islamic rule reduced the flexibility and autonomy that had been crucial advantages of the traditional Sogdian system. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century delivered the final blow to Sogdian political independence and cultural continuity, as the devastating destruction of Central Asian cities and the disruption of traditional trade routes eliminated the material foundation of Sogdian civilization. While some Sogdian communities survived in remote areas and some cultural traditions persisted in modified forms, the great age of Sogdian commercial dominance had ended forever. The rise of maritime trade routes and the development of new commercial centres in other regions further reduced the importance of Central Asian overland trade, making the traditional Sogdian role as intermediaries between East and West less crucial to global commerce. The destruction wrought by the Mongol invasions was particularly devastating for Sogdian civilization because it targeted the urban centres and commercial infrastructure that were the foundation of their power and influence. The systematic destruction of cities, irrigation systems and trading posts eliminated centuries of accumulated investment and expertise, while disrupting the personal and institutional networks that had sustained Sogdian commercial activities. The replacement of established commercial practices with Mongol administrative systems further undermined the distinctive advantages that had enabled Sogdian merchants to dominate international trade for over a millennium. Despite their political disappearance, the cultural and commercial legacy of the Sogdians continued to influence Central Asian and global development for centuries after their demise. The Sogdian language remained important in Central Asian scholarship and literature well into the Islamic period, while Sogdian commercial practices and legal traditions influenced the development of Islamic commercial law and international trade regulations. The urban planning and architectural traditions established by Sogdian cities provided models for later Central Asian urban development, while their approach to cultural tolerance and adaptation became part of the broader Central Asian tradition of cosmopolitan flexibility. The persistence of Sogdian influence in post-Sogdian Central Asia reflected the deep integration of their innovations and practices into the broader cultural and economic life of the region. Islamic merchants and administrators often adopted Sogdian commercial techniques, legal precedents, and organizational methods while adapting them to new religious and political contexts. The architectural and urban planning principles developed by Sogdian cities continued to influence Central Asian urban development for centuries, while their approach to managing cultural diversity and religious pluralism provided models for later Islamic societies dealing with similar challenges. The rediscovery of Sogdian civilization by modern scholars has been one of the great archaeological and historical achievements of the 20th and 21st centuries, as excavations at sites like Panjakent, Afrasiab, and other Sogdian centres have revealed the extraordinary sophistication and extent of their achievements. The decipherment of Sogdian texts found in the Dunhuang caves and other archaeological sites has provided unprecedented insights into Sogdian commercial practices, religious beliefs, and daily life, while demonstrating the central role they played in ancient Eurasian history. These discoveries have fundamentally altered scholarly understanding of ancient Central Asian history and the development of the Silk Road trade networks. The ongoing archaeological investigation of Sogdian sites continues to yield new discoveries that enhance understanding of their civilization while raising new questions about their organization, achievements, and ultimate fate. Recent excavations have revealed previously unknown aspects of Sogdian technology, art, and social organization, while providing new evidence of their extensive international connections and cultural influence. The application of advanced scientific techniques to Sogdian archaeological materials has enabled more precise dating, composition analysis, and reconstruction of ancient environments and economic activities. The linguistic legacy of Sogdian civilization is preserved in the numerous languages and scripts that derive from or were influenced by Sogdian, including Uyghur, Mongolian, and several other Central Asian languages that continue to be used today. The Sogdian script and language served as important vehicles for the transmission of Buddhist, Manichaean, and Christian texts across Central Asia, with many important religious and philosophical works surviving only in Sogdian translations. The study of these texts has provided valuable insights into the history of religions in Central Asia, while demonstrating the crucial role Sogdians played in facilitating intellectual and spiritual exchange between different civilizations. The preservation and study of Sogdian literary and documentary texts has opened new windows into the intellectual and spiritual life of ancient Central Asia, while revealing the sophisticated educational and cultural institutions that supported Sogdian civilization. The diversity of texts preserved in Sogdian includes not only commercial documents and legal records, but also religious literature, scientific treatises, and literary works that demonstrate the breadth and depth of Sogdian intellectual culture. The translation and interpretation of these texts continues to provide new insights into Sogdian society, while contributing to broader understanding of ancient Eurasian cultural history. In the dusty archives and museum collections where Sogdian artifacts and texts are preserved, and in the excavated ruins of their great cities that still dot the landscape of Central Asia, the legacy of this remarkable civilization continues to inspire scholars and capture imaginations around the world. The Sogdians created something unprecedented in human history, a truly international commercial civilization that bridged continents and cultures while maintaining its own distinctive identity and values. Their achievement demonstrates the potential for human societies to transcend political and cultural boundaries through commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange, while building prosperity and understanding across diverse communities. The story of the Sogdian trading empire reminds us that globalization is not a modern phenomenon, but rather a recurring pattern in human history, with each era developing its own methods for connecting distant regions and facilitating international cooperation. The Sogdian example shows that successful international integration requires not only economic opportunity, but also cultural tolerance, linguistic competence, and diplomatic skill that enable different societies to work together for mutual benefit. Their legacy challenges us to consider how contemporary globalization might learn from historical precedents, while avoiding the pitfalls that ultimately led to the decline of earlier international systems. As we face contemporary challenges related to international trade, cultural diversity, and global cooperation, the example of Sogdian civilization offers both inspiration and practical insights for building more inclusive and sustainable forms of international integration. Their success in creating prosperous and tolerant societies at the crossroads of civilizations demonstrates the potential for human cooperation to overcome political and cultural barriers while generating benefits for all participants. The lost Sogdian trading empire may have vanished from the political map, but its influence on the development of human civilization continues to resonate across the centuries, reminding us of the enduring power of commerce, culture, and diplomacy to bring people together across the vast distances that separate us on this interconnected planet. Behind the veils. Life in the Ottoman harem. Popular imagination paints the Ottoman harem as an exotic paradise of beautiful women waiting to please a powerful sultan. Hollywood films show silk-draped chambers where sultry concubines lounge by fountains competing for royal attention, in a central Eden hidden behind palace walls. The reality was far different, far more complex, and in many ways far more fascinating than any Orientalist fantasy. The Ottoman harem was indeed a place of extraordinary women, but not quite in the way Western stereotypes suggest. It was a center of political power where intelligent, ambitious women maneuvered for influence over the most powerful empire on earth. It was a training ground for female leaders who would rule from behind the scenes, shaping policy and succession for centuries. And it was a gilded prison where residents enjoyed luxury and privilege while being cut off from the outside world. Life in the harem was a study in contradictions: powerless women who wielded enormous influence, prisoners who lived in unimaginable luxury, and a system that oppressed women while simultaneously allowing some to rise to positions no European woman could dream of holding. The Topkapi Palace harem wasn't a single room of lounging beauties. It was a sprawling complex of over 300 rooms, housing up to 1,000 women. Built like a city within a city, it had its own kitchens, baths, libraries, mosques, gardens and workshops. The magnificent courtyards, fountains and intricately tiled chambers created an environment of stunning beauty designed to be a complete world unto itself. Entering the harem was like crossing into another realm. The House of Felicity, as it was formerly known, was separated from the outside world by walls, gates and the ever-present eunuch guards. No man except the Sultan, his sons and the eunuchs could enter. Even the Sultan's closest male advisors never saw the interior of the harem. The architecture itself told the story of Ottoman power and Islamic sensibilities. Each room was designed for specific purposes. The apartments of the valide, sultan, queen mother, the chambers of the chief concubine's quarters for newer arrivals, schoolrooms for education and workshops where women created embroidery, calligraphy and other arts. The famous harem baths were marvels of Ottoman engineering. Fed by hot springs and decorated with marble and precious stones, these weren't just places for washing, but centres of social life where alliances were formed, gossip was exchanged, and hierarchies were subtly reinforced through rituals of attendance and service. Gardens provided both beauty and symbolism. The carefully maintained courtyards with their fountains, fruit trees and flower beds created paradise on earth, the Islamic concept of heaven made manifest. Women could stroll through these spaces, breathe fresh air and enjoy natural beauty while remaining completely secluded from the outside world. Yet this beautiful environment was also a prison. The women inside could not leave without permission, could not see family members and had no legal rights outside the harem system. They lived in luxury, but it was luxury without freedom. The harem operated according to a strict hierarchy that determined everything from where you lived to what you ate. At the top sat the valide sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan, who wielded enormous power not just within the harem, but throughout the empire. She was often the most influential person in the entire Ottoman state, consulted on matters of war, diplomacy and succession. Below her were the Haseki, the sultan's favourite concubines who had borne him children. These women enjoyed apartments nearly as luxurious as the valide sultans, and wielded significant influence over policy and palace appointments. The most successful might eventually become Valida Sultan themselves if their sons inherited the throne. Next came the Iqbal, other concubines who had caught the Sultan's attention but hadn't yet borne children or gained Haseki status. They lived in hope of advancement and devoted themselves to education, art, and catching the Sultan's eye during his infrequent visits to the harem. The Gedikli were women who had become permanent fixtures of the harem without bearing children to the Sultan. Rather than being discarded, they often became teachers, administrators or supervisors. Many never saw the Sultan personally, but built important careers within the harem hierarchy. At the bottom were the Carrier new acquisitions who served as maids and students. Many were originally slaves captured in war or purchased from markets, though some were gifts from provincial governors or foreign dignitaries. These women entered the harem as complete outsiders and had to learn Ottoman customs, Islamic religion, court etiquette and Turkish language. What's remarkable about this hierarchy is how much social mobility it offered. A girl captured in war could, through intelligence, beauty or political skill, potentially rise to become the most powerful woman in the empire. This kind of advancement was virtually impossible for women anywhere else in the world at that time. Contrary to popular misconceptions, the Ottoman harem was as much a school as a residence. New arrivals underwent intensive education designed to transform them into perfect Ottoman ladies. They learned to read and write in Ottoman Turkish and often Arabic. They studied Islamic theology, Ottoman history and court customs. They received training in music, poetry, dance, needlework and conversation. The education was comprehensive and sophisticated. Many harem residents became accomplished poets, musicians and calligraphers. They corresponded with scholars and participated in literary salons within the palace. Some wrote memoirs or poetry that provides our best insights into harem life. The curriculum included practical politics as well as cultural refinement. Women learned the complex etiquette of court life, the proper forms of address for different ranks, the significance of various ceremonies and the subtle art of palace intrigue. They studied the genealogies of Ottoman royal family to understand succession dynamics and potential future alliances. Language instruction was particularly important. Most new arrivals spoke their native languages, Georgian, Circassian, Russian or others, but mastering Ottoman Turkish was essential for advancement. Many harem residents became genuinely multilingual, able to communicate with the Sultan's international correspondents and visitors. Religious education emphasized Sunni Islamic doctrine, but was often more flexible than might be expected. Many harem residents retained elements of their original faiths alongside their new Islamic identity. The syncretic nature of Ottoman Islam allowed for this kind of religious blending, especially in the private sphere of the harem. The harem operated on a complex economic system that was both separate from and integrated with the broader Ottoman economy. Each woman received an allowance appropriate to her status. The Valide Sultan controlled vast wealth, while newer arrivals received enough for basic needs. But the real economic power came through influence, gifts, and patronage networks. Harem women couldn't own property in their own names, but they could accumulate wealth through gifts from the Sultan, inheritances from deceased harem members, and profits from craft work. The most powerful women essentially ran their own business networks, investing in trade, commissioning architectural projects, and maintaining extensive households. Gift-giving was central to harem economics. When the Sultan visited, he brought presents, jewelry, fabrics, perfumes, books. The more valuable the gifts, the clearer the signal of favour. These presents weren't just personal luxuries, but political statements that affected a woman's status and power within the harem hierarchy. The most successful harem women became major philanthropists, endowing mosques, schools, hospitals and public works throughout the empire. The Süleymaniye Mosque complex in Istanbul was partially funded by Haseki Hürrem Sultan, known in the West as Roxolana, who also built hospitals and schools throughout Ottoman territories. Harem residents also engaged in trade through intermediaries. They invested in merchant ventures, silk production and craft guilds. Some of the finest Ottoman textiles, jewelry and decorative arts were produced within the harem workshops, both for internal use and for sale in Istanbul's markets. The economic independence that came with high harem status was unprecedented for women in most other societies. While European queens controlled wealth through their husbands or fathers, Ottoman harem leaders exercised direct economic power that rivaled that of major merchants or provincial governors. Perhaps nowhere was harem influence more crucial than in the fraught politics of Ottoman succession. Unlike European monarchies with clear inheritance laws, the Ottoman system allowed any of the Sultan's sons to inherit the throne. This created intense competition between different mothers to position their sons as heirs. The practice of fratricide, executing rival brothers upon accession, made these struggles literally matters of life and death. A woman whose son became sultan would see her other sons murdered to prevent civil war. This brutal reality shaped every aspect of harem politics and made the position of Valide Sultan both immensely powerful and emotionally devastating. Harem women formed alliances, gathered intelligence, and maneuvered for position like any court politicians. They cultivated relationships with palace officials, military leaders, and religious authorities who might support their sons' claims. They arranged marriages for daughters to cement political alliances. They funded public works to build popular support. The most successful practitioners of harem politics combined intelligence, patience, and ruthlessness. Haseki Hürrem Sultan, perhaps the most famous harem resident, maneuvered for decades to ensure her son Selim would inherit over the sons of other concubines. Her political skills were so formidable that she essentially served as co-ruler with her husband Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Succession crises could tear the harem apart. When Sultan Mehmed III became ruler in 1595, he immediately had 19 half-brothers executed, meaning 19 mothers lost their sons. The psychological toll of such events on harem residents can barely be imagined, yet the system continued because the alternative was potentially destructive civil wars. The period known as the Sultanate of Women, roughly 1550 to 1650, saw unprecedented female political power as a series of strong, valid sultans effectively ruled the empire while their sons occupied the throne. These women shaped Ottoman policy on war diplomacy, taxation, and law in ways that no European queen could match. Daily life in the harem followed rhythms dictated by Islamic prayer times, Ottoman court customs, and the season's requirements. The day began before dawn, with prayers followed by communal breakfast in accordance with strict hierarchy. The Valide Sultan and senior concubines ate separately from newcomers and servants. Mornings were typically devoted to education and craft work. Women attended lessons in reading, writing music, or religious instruction. They worked on elaborate embroideries, calligraphy, or other artistic projects that served both as personal accomplishment and potential gifts for the Sultan or other palace residents. The midday meal was followed by a rest period during the hottest part of the day. Afternoons might bring visits to the harem baths, time in the gardens, or social gatherings where women shared news, played games, or listened to musical performances. Evenings varied dramatically, depending on whether the Sultan was visiting the harem. His presence transformed the atmosphere entirely. Women vied for his attention while maintaining the elaborate etiquette required in his presence. When he was absent, evenings might be spent in storytelling, music, or quiet conversation. Religious observances punctuated the routine. In addition to daily prayers, the harem celebrated Islamic holidays with special foods, decorations, and ceremonies. Ramadan brought changes to daily schedules and special evening gatherings to break the fast. Seasonal variations added rhythm to harem life. Spring might bring special outings to palace gardens or hunting lodges. Summer could mean moves to cooler summer palaces along the Bosphorus. Winter brought indoor entertainments and increased focus on craft work and education. Personal relationships formed the emotional core of harem life. Women created surrogate families among fellow residents, particularly important given their separation from their original families. Mentor-student relationships between senior and junior women provided both education and emotional support. Life in the harem was shadowed by constant awareness of mortality and the precariousness of position. Political changes could overnight transform the most powerful woman into a vulnerable exile. Death in childbirth was a persistent threat. Epidemic diseases could sweep through the enclosed palace community. The practice of maintaining the harem through acquisition of new women meant constant reminders of the world outside that residents had lost. New arrivals brought news of their homelands, but also highlighted the permanent separation harem residents experienced from their origins. Aging presented particular challenges for harem women. Unlike the male Ottoman elite who could maintain power into old age harem residents, faced marginalization as they lost whatever physical beauty had initially gained them favor. The survival strategy involved transitioning from roles based on physical attraction to those based on experience, wisdom, and political acumen. Death customs within the harem reflected both Islamic practice and the unique circumstances of palace life. Women who died without outside family might be buried in palace cemeteries with elaborate tombs funded by their harem sisters. The most powerful might have entire mosque complexes built as their memorial. The psychological impact of harem life on residents is difficult to assess from historical distance, but surviving accounts suggest a complex mixture of gratitude for privilege, grief for lost homes and families, and intense focus on the political and social dynamics within the palace community. The Ottoman harem system began declining in the 19th century as the empire modernized and came under increasing European influence. The Tanzimat reforms aimed to modernize Ottoman law and administration, including changes to palace life and women's roles. The last traditional harem residents were evacuated from Topkapi Palace in 1924 following the establishment of the Turkish Republic. Some returned to their families if possible. Others were provided pensions and housing by the new government. The abolition of the Ottoman Sultanate ended a system that had operated for over 6 centuries. Modern Turkey struggles with how to remember and present the harem to contemporary audiences. Tourist presentations often emphasize the exotic and sensual aspects that appeal to international visitors. Serious historical scholarship works to separate fact from Orientalist fantasy while acknowledging the complex realities of women's lives within the system. The physical spaces of the harem remain as museums today. Visitors can walk through the same chambers where women once lived, learned, loved, and exercised power. The restored rooms give some sense of the luxury and beauty of harem life, while only hinting at the complex human dramas that unfolded within them. Perhaps most importantly, the Ottoman harem challenges simple narratives about women's oppression in Islamic societies. While the system certainly restricted women's freedoms in ways we now find unacceptable, it also provided opportunities for influence and advancement that were unavailable to women elsewhere. The most successful harem residents exercised political power that European queens could only envy. The Ottoman harem was ultimately a product of its time, a system that combined Islamic law, Ottoman politics, and practical imperial administration in ways that created unique opportunities and constraints for women. Understanding it requires looking beyond Orientalist stereotypes to see the real women who made lives, wielded power, and shaped history from behind the palace walls. Their stories remind us that women throughout history have found ways to exercise agency and influence, even within systems designed to constrain them. The harem may be gone, but the legacy of the women who turned their confinement into a platform for power continues to challenge our understanding of gender authority and resistance throughout history. The endless chase. Humanity's struggle to capture time. Time is the most democratic force in existence. It flows equally for emperors and peasants, geniuses and fools. Yet humanity has spent millennia trying to measure it, capture it, control it, and ultimately transcend it. Our relationship with time is one of the oldest obsessions in human history, driving innovations that shaped civilization itself. Before clocks ticked on walls and phones displayed digital readouts, time was wild. It was the sun's journey across the sky, the moon's changing face, the rhythm of seasons. Early humans lived in a world where now was all that truly mattered, where tomorrow was uncertain and where yesterday existed only in memory and story. The story of how we tame time is also the story of how time tamed us. Each innovation in timekeeping changed not just how we measured hours and days, but how we lived our lives, structured our societies, and understood our place in the universe. For most of human history, the sun was our master timekeeper. Dawn meant the beginning of daily activities. Noon marked the halfway point. Sunset signaled rest. This wasn't inconvenient, it was natural. Human bodies evolved to follow these solar rhythms, and our ancestors lived in harmony with what scientists now call our circadian cycles. The earliest timekeeping devices weren't clocks at all, but shadows. Around 3500 BCE, the Egyptians began using shadow sticks and later elaborate sundials to divide daylight into measurable portions. These devices were remarkably sophisticated. The best Egyptian sundials could accurately indicate hours, even as the sun's path changed throughout the year. But solar time had inherent problems. What did you do at night? How did you measure time on cloudy days? How did you coordinate activities when the length of daylight changed with the seasons? Different civilizations developed different solutions, creating a bewildering variety of time systems. The Romans divided their days into 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness, but these hours changed length with the seasons. A Roman summer hour was much longer than a winter hour. This seasonal time system worked well enough for agricultural societies where daily activities naturally aligned with available sunlight. The invention of water clocks clepsydra around 1400 BCE represented humanity's first attempt to measure time independently of celestial movements. These devices worked by allowing water to drip through small holes at a controlled rate. Greeks and Romans used elaborate water clocks with gears, bells, and automata that could indicate hours strike the time and even display astronomical information. Chinese water clocks became incredibly sophisticated, incorporating escapement mechanisms centuries before similar technology appeared in Europe. Some featured multiple tanks, adjustable flow rates, and complex timing systems that could measure quite precise intervals. Yet for all their ingenuity, these early timepieces served limited populations. Most people still lived by solar time, marking their days by the sun's movement and seasonal changes. Time remained loose, flexible, and deeply connected to natural rhythms. The next great revolution in timekeeping came from an unexpected source: Christian monks. Monastic communities needed to coordinate their complex schedules of prayers, which were supposed to occur at specific intervals throughout the day and night. This religious requirement drove innovations that would eventually transform secular society. Medieval monasteries developed increasingly sophisticated methods for keeping time. They used marked candles that burned for specific periods, incense sticks that smoldered at predictable rates, and improved water clocks that could function even during winter months when water didn't freeze. But the real breakthrough came with the development of mechanical clocks around 1300 CE. These early clocks, driven by weights and regulated by escapement mechanisms, represented a completely new approach to timekeeping. Instead of measuring time through natural processes like the sun's movement or water flow, they created time through mechanical action. The first mechanical clocks were enormous, expensive devices installed in cathedral towers. They didn't have faces or hands. They simply rang bells to mark the canonical hours for prayer. But their impact was revolutionary. For the first time in human history, communities could coordinate their activities according to precise, artificially created time intervals. These tower clocks became symbols of civic pride and technological advancement. Cities competed to build more accurate, more elaborate timepieces. The clock in Strasbourg Cathedral, completed in 1354, not only told time, but displayed astronomical information, tracked the calendar, and featured moving figures that performed during hourly shows. Mechanical clocks introduced the concept of equal hours, 60-minute periods that remained constant regardless of season. This was a radical departure from the traditional system of variable hours and began to standardize time measurement across different communities. For centuries, mechanical clocks remained public utilities. They were too large, expensive, and unreliable to be owned by individuals. But beginning in the 15th century, clockmakers began developing smaller, more portable timepieces. The spring-driven clock invented around 1430 made individual timekeeping possible. These early watches were large, inaccurate affairs worn on chains or carried in pockets. They were luxury items for the wealthy, often more decorative than functional. But as clockmaking techniques improved, personal timepieces became more accurate and affordable. By the 17th century, pocket watches were common among merchants, professionals, and anyone whose work required precise scheduling. The ownership of time was becoming democratized. This personalization of time had profound social implications. When time belonged to the community through public clocks, daily schedules remained flexible and social. But when individuals owned their own timepieces, they could organize their personal schedules independently of community rhythms. The Protestant work ethic, with its emphasis on punctuality and efficient use of time, both drove and was driven by the availability of personal timepieces. Time is money became more than a metaphor. It became an organizing principle of emerging capitalist societies. Personal timepieces also changed social relationships. Being on time became a mark of respectability and consideration for others. Lateness, which had been normal in societies without precise timekeeping, became a social offense. Perhaps no innovation changed humanity's relationship with time more dramatically than the railroad. Railways required unprecedented coordination. Trains had to arrive and depart on precise schedules to avoid collisions and maintain connections between different lines. Before railroads, time remained largely local. Each community set its clocks according to the sun's position in their sky, meaning that towns just a few miles apart might have significantly different times. This didn't matter when the fastest travel was on horseback, but it became a major problem when trains could cover vast distances in hours. Railroad companies initially tried to coordinate their schedules using their own standard times. Each company would designate a headquarters city time as the standard for their entire network. But as railroad networks expanded and connected with each other, this system became impossibly complex. A journey involving multiple railroad companies might require consulting several different time standards. The solution was standard time zones, first implemented in Britain and later adopted worldwide. On November 18, 1883, known as the Day of Two Noons, the United States and Canada transformed from a system of thousands of local times to just 4 standard time zones. This change was met with considerable resistance. Many people saw the imposition of railroad time as an attack on local autonomy and natural rhythms. There were riots in some cities as people protested the artificial standardization of time. But the benefits of standardized time quickly became apparent. Coordinated transportation enabled unprecedented economic development. Telegraph systems could now send time signals across vast distances, allowing chronometers and clocks to be synchronized with astronomical observations made hundreds of miles away. The railroad revolution in timekeeping was just the beginning. As global communication and transportation networks developed, the need for worldwide time coordination became apparent. The Prime Meridian Conference of 1884 established Greenwich, England, as the world's time standard. Greenwich Mean Time became the reference point for global timekeeping, dividing the world into 24 standard time zones. This standardization wasn't just practical, it was political. Choosing Greenwich over Paris, Berlin, or Washington reflected British dominance in global navigation and communication. Time itself became a form of soft power, with the former British Empire establishing temporal hegemony over much of the world. The development of radio in the early 20th century revolutionized time distribution. Radio time signals could instantly synchronize clocks across continents. The BBC's time signals, first broadcast in 1924, became the world's most trusted time reference. The famous pips that preceded BBC Dienst's news programmes allowed millions of people to set their clocks simultaneously. Radio time signals also enabled new levels of precision in navigation and scientific research. Ships could determine their longitude accurately by comparing local time with Greenwich Mean Time broadcast over radio. This capability proved crucial during both World Wars, when accurate navigation could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The next great leap in timekeeping came from an unexpected source, the piezoelectric properties of quartz crystals. In 1927, Warren Marrison and J.W. Horton at Bell Labs developed the first quartz clock, which used the regular vibrations of a quartz crystal to keep time with unprecedented accuracy. Quartz clocks were initially room-sized devices used primarily in laboratories and telecommunications facilities, but they represented a fundamental shift in timekeeping philosophy. Instead of mechanical movements or astronomical observations, time was now measured by atomic-level vibrations in crystalline structures. The development of transistor technology in the 1950s made quartz timekeeping portable and affordable. The first quartz watches appeared in the late 1960s and quickly revolutionized personal timekeeping. These watches were not only more accurate than their mechanical predecessors, but also cheaper to manufacture once the technology matured. The quartz crisis of the 1970s nearly destroyed the traditional mechanical watch industry. Swiss and German manufacturers, who had dominated high-end timekeeping for centuries, suddenly found their products obsolete. Many historic clockmaking companies disappeared while others survived only by reinventing themselves as luxury goods manufacturers. Quartz technology didn't just change watches, it transformed society's relationship with time itself. Suddenly, ordinary people had access to timekeeping accuracy that would have amazed the greatest clockmakers of previous eras. Being fashionably late became less acceptable when everyone could know the exact time to the minute. Even as quartz technology was revolutionizing consumer timekeeping, scientists were developing even more precise methods of measuring time. The atomic clock, first demonstrated in 1949, used the vibrations of atoms themselves as a time standard. Atomic clocks work by measuring the frequency of electromagnetic radiation emitted by atoms transitioning between energy levels. The cesium-133 atom in particular provides an incredibly stable frequency that forms the basis of our current definition of the second. Modern atomic clocks are so accurate that they would gain or lose less than 1 second over millions of years. This precision has enabled GPS navigation, high-speed financial trading, and scientific experiments that require coordination to billionths of a second. The global positioning system deployed in the 1980s relies entirely on atomic timekeeping. GPS satellites carry atomic clocks that must remain synchronized to within nanoseconds for the system to provide accurate location information. The fact that we can navigate anywhere on Earth using pocket-sized devices is a direct result of our mastery of atomic time. The digital revolution changed not just how we keep time, but how we experience it. Digital clocks display time as numbers rather than positions on a clock face, fundamentally altering our perception of temporal relationships. Traditional analog clocks show time as a continuous flow. You can see where you are in the hour, how much time has passed, and how much remains until the next hour. Digital displays present time as a series of discrete moments, each replacing the last without showing the relationship between them. This shift from analog to digital representation mirrors broader changes in how modern society experiences time. We've moved from thinking about time as a flowing river to treating it as a series of precisely defined moments. This change has implications for everything from how we schedule meetings to how we understand aging and mortality. Digital timekeeping also enabled new forms of time-based coordination. Computer networks could synchronize to the millisecond, enabling high-frequency trading, real-time communication, and distributed computing systems that would have been impossible with mechanical timekeeping. The Internet era brought new challenges and opportunities for timekeeping. Network Time Protocol (NTP), developed in the 1980s, allows computers worldwide to synchronize their clocks over Internet connections. This ensures that emails, financial transactions, and digital communications can be accurately timestamped and coordinated across global networks. But the digital age also created new forms of temporal fragmentation. While we have access to more accurate timekeeping than ever before, we also live across multiple time zones virtually. People maintain relationships and conduct business with others living in different times, creating complex schedules that span the globe. Social media and constant connectivity have created what some researchers call time compression. The feeling that time is speeding up because we're processing more information and experiencing more rapid change. The pace of technological innovation creates a sense that years contain more change than decades once did. Meanwhile, the precision of digital timekeeping has created new forms of temporal anxiety. When we can measure time to the nanosecond, being a few minutes late feels worse than it did when clocks were accurate only to the nearest quarter hour. Our relationship with time has fundamentally changed as our ability to measure it has improved. Pre-industrial societies lived in what anthropologists call task time. Time was defined by activities and natural rhythms rather than abstract measurements. You ate when hungry, slept when tired, and worked until tasks were completed. Industrial society replaced task time with clock time, arbitrary divisions that organized activities according to mechanical schedules rather than human or natural rhythms. This shift enabled unprecedented coordination and productivity, but also created new forms of stress and alienation. The acceleration of timekeeping precision in the modern era has created what sociologist Hartmut Rosa calls social acceleration, the feeling that life is speeding up as technological change outpaces human adaptation. We have more ways to save time, but feel like we have less time than ever. Studies show that people in societies with precise timekeeping are more likely to experience time anxiety, scheduling stress, and the feeling that they're running out of time. Paradoxically, our mastery over time has made many people feel more enslaved by it than ever before. Perhaps the most profound impact of improved timekeeping has been on technology itself. Almost every modern technology depends on precise time measurement. Computer processors operate on clock cycles measured in nanoseconds. Financial markets rely on timestamps accurate to microseconds. GPS navigation requires atomic-level timing precision. But technology has also begun to change our fundamental understanding of time itself. Relativistic physics revealed that time is not the unchanging constant Newton imagined, but a dimension that can be stretched, compressed, and bent by gravity and velocity. Einstein's theories require constant adjustments to GPS satellite clocks because time literally runs differently in orbit than it does on Earth's surface. Quantum physics suggests even stranger relationships between time and reality. Quantum entanglement seems to occur instantaneously, regardless of distance, challenging our understanding of temporal sequence. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that time might not flow in the linear direction we experience, but instead exist as a dimension we move through. These discoveries raise profound questions about the nature of time itself. Is the precise mechanical time we've created through clocks and atomic measurements really time as it exists in the universe? Or have we created an artificial construct that serves human needs but doesn't reflect the deeper reality of temporal existence? As we look toward the future, our relationship with time continues to evolve. Scientists are developing optical atomic clocks that could be accurate to within 1 second over the age of the universe. These devices might enable new technologies we can't yet imagine, just as atomic clocks made GPS possible. Virtual and augmented reality technologies are beginning to offer new ways of experiencing time. VR systems can create temporal illusions where minutes feel like hours, or hours feel like minutes. As these technologies improve, we might gain unprecedented control over our subjective experience of time's passage. Artificial intelligence systems operate on timescales both much faster and much slower than human consciousness. AI can make millions of decisions in the time it takes a human to form a single thought, while machine learning systems might take years to reach conclusions that seem obvious to humans. As AI becomes more integrated into daily life, we may need to adapt to these non-human temporal rhythms. Some futurists speculate about technologies that could further transform our relationship with time. Cryonic preservation might allow individuals to skip through time, experiencing the future without living through the intervening years. Quantum computers might enable forms of computation that process information outside our normal temporal experience. Life extension technologies raise questions about how our relationship with time might change if human lifespans dramatically increase. Would centuries-long lives make us more patient, or would the same psychological time pressures simply expand to fill longer periods? Looking back over humanity's long struggle to measure and master time, several patterns emerge. Each advance in timekeeping technology has enabled new forms of coordination and productivity, while also creating new forms of temporal anxiety and control. We've moved from being subjects of natural time, subordinate to the sun seasons and biological rhythms, to being creators of artificial time that serves human purposes. But this mastery has come at a cost. Many people feel more rushed, stressed, and time-pressured than their ancestors who possessed far less precise timekeeping. The irony is profound. The more accurately we can measure time, the less time we feel we have. The more we try to save time through efficiency and technology, the more tasks we pack into our days. The more precisely we can schedule our activities, the more complex our schedules become. Perhaps the deepest insight from our long relationship with time is that time itself hasn't changed. Only our measurement and organization of it has transformed. The sun still rises and sets as it did for our earliest ancestors. Our hearts still beat roughly once per second, as they have for all human history. We still age and die according to biological rhythms that no clock can alter. What has changed is our consciousness of time, our ability to slice it into ever smaller pieces, and our sense that we must use every moment productively. We've gained unprecedented control over temporal coordination, while somehow losing the ability to simply exist in the present moment without reference to past or future. The story of timekeeping is ultimately the story of human ambition, our desire to understand control and transcend the limitations of our existence. We cannot stop time, reverse it, or escape its passage, but we can measure it with extraordinary precision and use that measurement to coordinate incredible feats of human cooperation. From sundials to atomic clocks, from seasonal time to nanosecond precision, from task time to clock time, humanity has never stopped chasing time. We may never catch it, but in the pursuit, we've built the technological and social infrastructure of modern civilization. Time remains our most democratic experience and our most mysterious constraint. It gives equally to all, yet never quite enough to anyone. It flows forward relentlessly, yet can seem to speed up, slow down, or stop entirely in our subjective experience. In the end, our long struggle to capture time may teach us that the point isn't to master time, but to live meaningfully within it. All our clocks, for all their precision, can only tell us what time it is, never what to do with the time we have. The chase continues as it always has, as it always will. Time remains free even as we try to price it. It remains wild even as we try to tame it. And perhaps that's as it should be. After all, without the mystery of time, we might have nothing left to pursue. History. Bessie Wallace Warfield was born on June 19, 1896, in Blue Ridge Summit, Pennsylvania, into circumstances that were far removed from the royal palaces and aristocratic circles where she would eventually achieve notoriety and influence, as her family represented the declining fortunes of old American society that had lost much of its wealth and social position during the economic upheavals of the late 19th century while maintaining pretensions to gentility and respectability that would profoundly shape her character and ambitions throughout her remarkable life. Her father, Teakle Wallace Warfield, came from a prominent Baltimore family that had once possessed considerable wealth and social standing, but had experienced financial difficulties that forced them to live modestly while maintaining connections to Maryland's established social elite through family relationships and historical associations that provided access to refined society despite limited economic resources that constrained their lifestyle and opportunities for social advancement through traditional means. Her mother, Alice Montague Warfield, came from more humble origins in Virginia but possessed beauty, charm, and social intelligence that had enabled her to marry above her station while adapting to the expectations and customs of Baltimore society that valued breeding, manners, and family connections over mere wealth or commercial success during a period when old Southern families were struggling to maintain their social position and cultural influence despite the economic and political changes that had transformed American society following the Civil War and Reconstruction. The early death of Wallace's father, when she was only 5 months old, created financial hardship for the family, while placing her mother in the precarious position of a young widow with limited resources who would need to rely on family charity and her own resourcefulness to provide for her daughter's upbringing and education in ways that would maintain their social standing and prepare Wallace for the kind of advantageous marriage that represented the primary path to security and advancement for women of their class and circumstances. The financial support provided by Wallace's uncle Solomon Davis Warfield, a wealthy bachelor banker who had achieved considerable business success while remaining deeply committed to family obligations and social respectability, enabled her to receive the kind of education and social training that was considered appropriate for young ladies of good family despite their reduced circumstances, including attendance at exclusive private schools where she learned the social graces, cultural accomplishments, and refined manners that would later serve her well in navigating sophisticated international society and royal circles that valued elegance, wit, and sophisticated conversation over mere beauty or youth. Her education at Oldfield School, an elite boarding institution in Maryland that emphasized character development and social preparation rather than academic achievement, provided her with the confidence and social skills necessary for moving comfortably among wealthy and influential people, while developing the sharp intelligence and keen observation of human nature that would enable her to understand and manipulate social dynamics in ways that advanced her personal interests and objectives. The social environment of Baltimore during Wallace's youth represented a unique blend of Southern tradition and Northern sophistication that emphasized family heritage, personal refinement, and social connections while providing opportunities for young women to develop the kind of sophisticated understanding of society and human nature that would later enable her to succeed in international circles where intelligence, charm, and strategic thinking were valued over conventional beauty or traditional accomplishments. Her participation in Baltimore's social season and her presentation to society as debutante provided early experience in the competitive world of social positioning and strategic relationship building, where success depended on understanding unspoken rules and hierarchies while presenting oneself in ways that attracted the right kind of attention from influential and desirable people who could provide opportunities for advancement and security. The first marriage to Earl Winfield Spencer Jr., a United States Navy aviator, in 1916 represented both escape from financial uncertainty and entrance into a social world that was very different from Baltimore society, as military life provided opportunities for travel and exposure to diverse people and circumstances, while creating challenges related to frequent relocations, financial limitations, and the particular stresses that affected military families during World War I and its aftermath, when career officers faced uncertain prospects and limited opportunities for advancement in peacetime service that might not provide the kind of lifestyle and social position that ambitious wives expected and demanded. The marriage revealed fundamental incompatibilities between Wallace's social ambitions and sophisticated tastes, and Spencer's more conventional military background and limited financial resources, while his problems with alcohol and their inability to have children created additional strains that would eventually make the relationship unsustainable, despite their initial mutual attraction and shared hopes for happiness and success. The gradual deterioration of her first marriage during the early 1920s coincided with her exposure to more sophisticated social circles through military postings and social connections that introduced her to wealthy and influential people who lived very differently from her previous experience, while demonstrating possibilities for lifestyle and social position that seemed impossible to achieve through her current circumstances and relationships. Her separation from Spencer and eventual divorce in 1927 represented both personal failure and strategic decision to pursue opportunities that required freedom from unsuitable marriage that limited her options and prevented her from taking advantage of her intelligence, charm, and social skills in environments where these qualities could lead to more satisfactory relationships and circumstances that matched her ambitions and self-perception as someone destined for grander things than conventional middle-class domesticity. The second marriage to Ernest Aldrich Simpson, a British-American businessman with connections to London society and international commerce, in 1928 provided entry into more sophisticated social and economic circles while introducing her to European culture and British society that would prove crucial for her eventual relationship with Prince Edward and integration into royal circles that had previously been completely beyond her reach or imagination. Simpson's business interests and social connections provided opportunities for travel and exposure to international society, while his British citizenship and family background offered potential access to levels of society that would have been impossible through American connections alone, though their marriage was primarily based on practical considerations and mutual convenience, rather than passionate love or deep emotional compatibility that might have sustained them through the challenges that would eventually arise. The move to London and establishment of household in Bryanston Court during the early 1930s provided Wallis with platform for developing social relationships and building reputation as accomplished hostess whose intelligence, wit, and sophisticated understanding of international affairs made her sought-after guest and friend among diplomats, politicians, businessmen, and aristocrats who valued stimulating conversation and elegant entertainment over conventional social obligations and traditional English customs that might have seemed dated or restrictive to Americans accustomed to more informal and egalitarian social relationships. Her ability to create atmosphere of sophisticated discussion and cultural appreciation while maintaining elegant style and gracious hospitality attracted attention from influential people who could provide introductions and opportunities for social advancement that would eventually lead to her fateful meeting with the Prince of Wales. The circumstances of her introduction to Prince Edward in 1931 through mutual friends Lady Furness and Lady Cunard represented culmination of careful social positioning and strategic relationship building that had enabled her to move from relatively obscure American divorcee to respected member of London society, whose intelligence and sophistication made her suitable companion for heir to throne despite her unconventional background and personal history that would normally have excluded her from royal circles where breeding, tradition, and social propriety were considered essential qualifications for intimate association with members of the Windsor family. The initial development of their friendship occurred within context of Edward's reputation for unconventional behaviour, and his preference for American society and modern attitudes that contrasted sharply with traditional royal protocols and expectations, while creating opportunities for someone like Wallis who possessed qualities that the prince found more attractive and stimulating than conventional British aristocratic women who might have been more appropriate but less engaging companions. The gradual transformation of their friendship into a romantic relationship during the mid-1930s occurred against backdrop of increasing political tensions in Europe and growing concerns about Edward's suitability for kingship due to his controversial political views, lifestyle choices, and apparent reluctance to accept traditional responsibilities associated with his position as heir to throne and future head of constitutional monarchy that required careful balance between personal preferences and institutional obligations that could not be compromised without serious consequences for royal authority and political stability. Their relationship developed through shared interests in travel, sophisticated society, and modern culture, while Edward's obvious devotion and willingness to sacrifice traditional expectations for personal happiness created unprecedented situation that would test constitutional system and social conventions in ways that had never been anticipated by political and royal establishments. The increasing intensity of their relationship and Edward's obvious intention to marry Wallis, despite her previous divorces and American nationality, created constitutional crisis that would ultimately force choice between personal happiness and royal duty, while exposing fundamental tensions between modern individualistic values and traditional institutional obligations that had sustained British monarchy through centuries of political and social change. The specific challenges included not only constitutional questions about whether king could marry divorced women, but also broader concerns about public opinion, religious sensibilities, and political implications of royal marriage that would affect relationships with dominion governments and domestic political parties whose support was essential for maintaining monarchical system within democratic framework that required popular approval and political legitimacy. The events of 1936, including the death of King George V and Edward's accession to throne as King Edward VIII, intensified pressure surrounding his relationship with Wallis while creating timeline for resolution of marriage question that could not be postponed indefinitely without damaging royal institution and constitutional system that depended on clear succession and stable leadership during period of international crisis and domestic political challenges that required strong monarchy capable of providing unity and continuity during uncertain times. The abdication crisis that developed during final months of 1936 represented unprecedented challenge to constitutional system, while revealing fundamental disagreements about nature of kingship and appropriate balance between personal autonomy and institutional responsibility that would have lasting implications for royal family and British political system. The decision to abdicate on December 11, 1936, in order to marry the woman I love, created international sensation while transforming both Edward and Wallis into historical figures whose personal choices had altered course of British history and royal succession in ways that demonstrated power of individual decision-making to affect institutional structures and political arrangements that had previously seemed permanent and unchangeable. The abdication speech, broadcast to British Empire and heard by millions of people worldwide, created lasting monument to romantic love while establishing precedent for prioritizing personal happiness over traditional duty that would influence subsequent generations and create new understanding of relationship between individual rights and institutional obligations in democratic societies. The immediate aftermath of abdication included exile from Britain and transformation of former king into Duke of Windsor, while Wallis became Duchess of Windsor through marriage ceremony in France in June 1937 that was boycotted by royal family and conducted without official British representation, despite international media attention and public interest that continued to follow their relationship and activities. The terms of Edward's abdication and subsequent arrangements included financial settlement and restrictions on future residence and activities that effectively prevented their return to prominent public roles in British society, while requiring them to build new life outside traditional frameworks and expectations that had previously defined their identities and social positions. The years of exile during late 1930s and early 1940s included extensive travel and residence in France, where they established elegant lifestyle supported by Edward's financial settlement and their social connections among international society of wealthy Americans and Europeans who appreciated their sophistication and celebrity status, despite their controversial past and uncertain political status that made them objects of fascination and speculation rather than respected members of established social hierarchies. Their lifestyle during this period emphasized luxury, elegance, and cultural pursuits, while they struggled to find meaningful roles and purposes that could provide satisfaction and social significance beyond their historical notoriety and celebrity status that attracted attention but did not necessarily provide opportunities for substantive contribution or personal fulfillment. The outbreak of World War II created additional complications for their situation, as questions arose about their political loyalties and potential security risks associated with their German connections and Edward's previous expressions of sympathy for Nazi policies and leadership that had created concerns among British government officials who worried about possible collaboration or espionage activities that could compromise war effort and national security. The appointment of Edward as governor of the Bahamas in 1940 provided solution that removed them from European theatre while giving them official duties and responsibilities that occupied their time while keeping them under British supervision and away from potentially compromising situations or relationships that might have created diplomatic incidents or security breaches during critical period of national survival. The Bahamas governorship from 1940 to 1945 represented their most significant period of public service and official responsibility since abdication, while providing opportunities for administrative experience and social contribution that demonstrated Edward's capabilities and commitment, despite previous criticisms of his character and judgment that had influenced opinions about his suitability for high office and public trust. Their work in colonial administration included efforts to improve economic conditions, social services and race relations in territory that had been neglected by previous administrations, while their personal conduct and official performance generally earned respect and appreciation from local populations who benefited from their attention and advocacy despite initial skepticism about their motivations and qualifications. The post-war period brought renewed exile and search for meaningful activities and residence, as they were effectively excluded from significant roles in British public life while possessing wealth, social connections, and international recognition that enabled comfortable lifestyle but limited opportunities for substantive contribution or public service that might have provided purpose and satisfaction beyond social activities and personal interests. Their residence in France and involvement in international society during 1950s and 1960s included charitable work, cultural activities, and social leadership among American expatriates and international community, while they gradually adapted to roles as elder statesmen and historical figures whose earlier dramatic choices had secured their place in history despite their current marginal status in contemporary political and social affairs. The later years of their marriage revealed both enduring devotion and growing challenges as they faced health problems, financial concerns, and social isolation that tested their relationship, while demonstrating remarkable resilience and mutual support that sustained them through difficulties and disappointments that might have destroyed less committed partnerships. Edward's declining health during 1960s and early 1970s required increasing care and attention from Wallis, who demonstrated dedication and loyalty that contradicted earlier criticisms of her character and motivations, while proving that their relationship had evolved into genuine partnership based on love and mutual dependence rather than mere ambition or calculation that some critics had suggested motivated her original pursuit of royal marriage. The death of the Duke of Windsor in 1972 ended one of the most famous love stories in modern history, while leaving Wallis as widow, whose later years would be marked by declining health, social isolation, and gradual withdrawal from public life that had previously provided meaning and identity despite its controversial origins and complicated legacy. Her final years in Paris included increasing reliance on staff and medical care while she struggled with dementia and physical deterioration that gradually erased memories and capabilities that had once made her formidable social figure and historical personality, whose influence had changed course of British royal history through personal choices and individual determination. The death of the Duchess of Windsor in 1986 marked final chapter of a remarkable story that had begun 90 years earlier, with birth of ambitious American girl whose intelligence, charm, and determination had eventually enabled her to achieve relationship with future king while creating constitutional crisis that transformed British monarchy and influenced understanding of relationship between personal happiness and public duty in democratic societies, where individual rights and institutional obligations must be balanced through complex negotiations and compromises that cannot always satisfy all parties or resolve all conflicts. Her funeral and burial beside Edward in Royal Cemetery at Frogmore represented final reconciliation with royal family that had largely excluded them during their lifetime, while acknowledging their historical significance and personal devotion that had sustained them through decades of exile and controversy. The immediate historical impact of Wallis Simpson's relationship with Edward VIII included fundamental changes in British royal succession that brought George VI to throne and eventually led to reign of Elizabeth II, whose character and approach to royal duties provided stability and continuity that restored public confidence in monarchical institution after crisis that had threatened its survival and credibility during crucial period of international tension and domestic political challenges. The abdication crisis also established important constitutional precedents about relationship between monarch and government, while demonstrating limits of royal authority and importance of parliamentary approval and public support for major constitutional changes that affect succession and institutional arrangements in democratic constitutional monarchies. The broader cultural and social impact of their story included transformation of public attitudes toward divorce, romantic love, and personal autonomy that influenced changing social norms and legal frameworks governing marriage and family relationships in Britain and throughout Western societies during mid-20th century, when traditional values and institutional authorities were being challenged by individualistic philosophies and democratic ideologies that prioritized personal choice over conventional obligations and social expectations. Their example provided both inspiration for those seeking to prioritize personal happiness over social convention and warning about potential costs and consequences of challenging established institutions and traditional arrangements that might provide stability and security despite their limitations and restrictions on individual autonomy. The international influence of their story extended beyond British borders to affect understanding of monarchy, celebrity culture, and relationship between private life and public responsibility in societies throughout world where similar tensions between individual rights and institutional obligations created ongoing debates about appropriate limits and expectations for public figures whose personal choices could affect broader social and political arrangements that transcended their individual circumstances and preferences. The global media coverage of their relationship and its consequences established new patterns for celebrity journalism and public interest in private lives of famous people, while creating precedents for invasive coverage and commercial exploitation of personal relationships that continue to influence contemporary media practices and social attitudes. The feminist interpretation of Wallis Simpson's life and choices has generated debate about whether her pursuit of royal marriage represented female empowerment and strategic use of available opportunities for social advancement or exploitation of traditional gender expectations and stereotypes that ultimately reinforced conventional limitations on women's autonomy and achievement through independent action rather than dependence on relationships with powerful men. Her intelligence, sophistication, and social skills demonstrated capabilities that might have enabled significant achievement in business, politics, or cultural fields if she had lived in a period when such opportunities were more readily available to women, while her success in navigating complex social and political environments revealed strategic thinking and leadership abilities that transcended conventional expectations about feminine capabilities and contributions. The psychological analysis of her personality and motivations has emphasized both her remarkable resilience and adaptability in facing challenges and setbacks that might have defeated less determined individuals, and her apparent emotional detachment and calculating approach to relationships that enabled her to pursue advantages while maintaining distance from potential disappointments or failures that could have undermined her confidence and determination. Her ability to inspire devoted love from Edward while maintaining independence and personal identity throughout their relationship demonstrated unusual combination of emotional intelligence and self-preservation that enabled her to achieve extraordinary objectives while avoiding complete subordination to expectations and demands that might have limited her autonomy and personal development. The economic and social analysis of her background and circumstances has revealed how changes in American society during late 19th and early 20th centuries created opportunities for social mobility and international marriage that enabled individuals with limited financial resources but significant personal qualities to achieve remarkable advancement through strategic relationships and cultural adaptation that transcended traditional class boundaries and national limitations. Her success in moving from modest origins in Baltimore to royal circles in London demonstrated possibilities for individual achievement through intelligence, charm, and determination, while highlighting importance of education, social skills, and cultural sophistication for navigating complex international society where birth and wealth were important, but not necessarily determinative factors for social success and recognition. The constitutional and political consequences of the abdication crisis continue to influence discussions about monarchy, succession, and relationship between royal family and democratic government in constitutional systems where traditional institutions must adapt to changing social values and political expectations while maintaining legitimacy and effectiveness in contemporary contexts that may differ significantly from historical circumstances that shaped original constitutional arrangements and royal prerogatives. The precedent established by Edward's choice to prioritize personal happiness over institutional duty created new understanding of royal obligations and limitations, while demonstrating that even monarchs must choose between competing values and responsibilities when conflicts arise between personal desires and public expectations. The literary and artistic legacy of their story includes numerous books, films, documentaries, and other cultural productions that have interpreted their relationship and its historical significance, while reaching audiences who may not be familiar with detailed historical circumstances, but can identify with universal themes about love, sacrifice, and conflict between individual desires and social obligations that transcend specific cultural and temporal contexts. The continuing popular fascination with their story reflects both romantic appeal of their devotion and dramatic consequences of their choices, while providing framework for exploring contemporary questions about relationship between personal autonomy and institutional responsibility that remain relevant for modern democratic societies. The scholarly historical assessment of Wallis Simpson's role and significance has evolved from initial focus on her personal responsibility for constitutional crisis to more sophisticated understanding of complex social, political, and cultural factors that created circumstances in which individual choices could have such dramatic institutional consequences, while recognizing both her remarkable personal achievements and the broader historical forces that shaped possibilities and limitations for her actions and their effects. The academic study of her life has contributed to broader understanding of women's history, international society, and constitutional development, while providing insights into personality and leadership that transcend gender categories and specific historical circumstances. The ongoing relevance of her example lies in her demonstration that individual determination and strategic thinking could overcome significant obstacles and achieve extraordinary objectives while creating lasting impact on institutions and social arrangements that had previously seemed permanent and unchangeable. Though her story also provides warnings about potential costs and unintended consequences of pursuing personal goals without adequate consideration of broader social and political implications that might affect others and create unforeseen problems for individuals and institutions alike. Her life continues to provide inspiration for those facing difficult choices between personal happiness and social obligations, while demonstrating both possibilities for achievement and importance of understanding context and consequences when making decisions that could affect not only individual lives, but also broader social and political arrangements. Wallis Simpson remains one of the most controversial and fascinating figures in 20th century history, whose personal choices and individual characteristics created constitutional crisis and historical consequences that far exceeded what might normally be expected from private relationship and personal decisions, while her intelligence, determination, and social skills enabled her to achieve remarkable transformation from modest circumstances to international notoriety and lasting historical significance that continues to influence understanding of love, duty, and relationship between individual autonomy and institutional responsibility in democratic societies where personal freedom and social obligations must be balanced through ongoing negotiation and compromise that reflects changing values and circumstances while preserving essential stability and continuity.